Hi. This is Novel Admire. Welcome to my channel. Have fun. The Little Prince in the Ossuary. Chapter 1. In a dark place, within a black and weightless space, a boy was curled up, floating as if he were in space. It was a scene that could only possibly be seen inside a virtual reality. There, one could see the sunset 1,440 times within 24 hours. It was a fictitious world that responded to the will of an individual. No other person could exist there. Just at the boy's arm's reach, something was shining in the darkness. It was a square-shaped screen. The screen was showing the people whom the boy had to perform as: Toni Morrison, Sadako Ogata, Lyndon B. Johnson, Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Winston Churchill, Adolf Hitler. The boy had watched that screen for so long until everything was engraved in his head. With a heavy snowfall weighing on his heart, he could now easily imitate their words, their accents, and their gestures. To be an actor, one had to study acting. Thinking of the days he'd spent trying to become adept in acting only made him feel dull and gloomy, but it was an effort that was needed in order to get stars. Only by getting enough stars would the rose not wither. The rose may have thorns, but it was still beautiful. He didn't want to see the end of a thing of beauty, even if holding it in his hands would cause him to bleed. The outside world always tries to turn me into someone that I'm not. I just want to be myself, at least here, the boy thought. But he had no choice, so once again, the boy decided to tame himself. If he could sometimes make a compromise with his conscience, so that he could find some joy in it, perhaps it wouldn't be that bad. Everything's ready. It's time to set off on a boring journey on my 27th attempt at this game. In the moment the boy thought so, the virtual world of Days After Apocalypse unfolded in front of him, accompanied by a monologue from an artificial intelligence mimicking the boy's own voice. Journal, page 2, Camp Roberts, the origin of the apocalypse was China. A disease that turns human beings into some kind of non-human creatures emerged and engulfed the entirety of East Asia in just half a month. They gave this plague the name of Morgellons, and I heard it's currently spreading all across Europe. I used to be Korean. The reason I say used to is that there's no longer a country I can go back to. I personally think that I was a lucky case because I was studying in America as an exchange student when the epidemic broke out. If not, I would have either become one of those walking corpses or been eaten alive by them. The people who'd lost their countries were taken to refugee camps. I was no exception either. Due to the martial law, I could no longer stay with my host family, therefore, I was taken to Camp Roberts. I heard that it used to be the army base of the National Guard, and was now designated as the first refugee camp. It's located about halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. The number of refugees has been increasing day by day. It's been 5 months since I first came here and the refugee camp is starting to look more like a city than a camp now. They plan to move the rest of the people to Fort Hunter Liggett, another army base located about 50 kilometers northwest from here, once the population reaches the limit. Apparently, the second camp is surrounded by mountains, so people are saying it might be safer there. The number of incidents reported has increased due to the increasing number of people in the camp. Some of the refugees have formed factions and began to rob supplies and rations from other refugees. I heard some of them even murder those who resist. The names of these factions are very frightening. The names Ossuary, the Chinese faction, and Sumaishike, the Japanese faction, were the names of crime syndicates that used to exist in their respective countries. Some say that the key figures in these factions are actually people from those syndicates. But surprisingly, the US Army hasn't taken any measures yet. I mean, it's not that I can't understand why. There's only a single battalion managing a whole camp full of refugees. Wouldn't they need a middleman or something? There's been a rumor floating around the camp about factions bribing the US Army commander with sexual favors. It must be true. Yesterday, I saw a man, One of the members of the Korean patriotic community, dragging a woman into an obscure alley. She was crying for help. One of the American soldiers tried to stop the man when he witnessed the scene, but after the soldier talked to the man for a minute, the soldier just backed away with his brows creased. One more thing about the treatment of refugees. According to CNN reports, approximately 60% of the world's population must have been turned since the Morgellons outbreak. Experts say that we must be wary since morality can be quickly replaced by depravity in the face of the crisis that's humanity's extinction. I think the best place to witness that change is, sadly, Camp Roberts. Journal, page 5, Camp Roberts. The majority of the refugees here are from countries in Asia and Oceania, and most of them are from China and Korea, countries that have bitter feelings towards the Japanese. And as expected, conflict arose between those nationalities. Lots of Japanese are ending up dead or wishing they could be. The largest Japanese faction, Sumaishike, is desperately fighting, but to no avail. The US military is still turning a blind eye. I noticed that quite a few soldiers greased their brows when they heard the news, but none of them stood up to do anything. I think they might have gotten orders from above. The only thing the US military did was to set up barbed wire fences. The whole camp has been split into several different sections now, and they've put about 200 people of the same nationality in each section. Though this kind of conflict has risen every once in a while, I've been able to stay relatively safe, helping the military as an interpreter. To my surprise, not many Korean refugees are able to speak English. It's because most of the Koreans here are either those who became stranded in the US while on a trip or those who urgently escaped Korea at the beginning of the Morgellons outbreak. It seemed like the latter case is by far the most common. Those who are fairly fluent in English, like me, are offered positions as middlemen. Those who've already taken the job say that they get a lot of benefits from it. What they like the most about it is that they get treated like actual human beings. The soldiers here don't take refugees as humans. To them, they are more like livestock. But I can understand, it's hard to maintain one's humanity in such a hopeless situation. I advise, LVL for insight, you can either accept or reject the US military's offer of a role as a middleman. If you accept, you will gain the US military's favor, and there will be an upward revision to your reputation within the community. If you refuse, there will not be any foreseeable benefit, but there may be advantages or disadvantages which you cannot yet infer with your current abilities. If you want more detailed advice, you will need to upgrade the level of insight. Player's choice, accept the offer. I can't believe they offered me, someone underage, to be a middleman. At first, I told them that I might be too young for the job. But the US military officer let out a laugh and said that age didn't matter, giving me a full story about how the US always gave preference to English speakers. In the 1980s, the United States sought to support nationalist forces to oust the Soviet Union from Afghanistan. The problem was that the CIA had no Arabic speakers at the time, so they didn't know whom to provide support to. However, they found an Afghan national leader who could speak English. So, despite knowing his nasty character, they chose to provide the money to that leader, who later created the Taliban and screwed over the US. After finishing the story, the military officer then forced me to take the job, saying I didn't get a choice. The area I've been assigned to is the solar power plant located across Route 101, opposite to the base. Here, the panels need to be wiped regularly, and some new panels and transformers have to be installed whenever the camp gets more people. My job is to manage the Koreans who are sent to work here. One of my duties is to distribute rations. There have been a few adults several times older than me who've tried to please me. I get chills just by imagining what they might have been thinking behind those smiling faces. Some factions have contacted me, telling me to join them. Reasonably thinking, it might be safer for me to join one of the factions because, as time goes by, more and more English speakers will appear, and I'm not sure I will be able to keep my job when that happens. I advise, LVL4 Insight, you may decide which faction to join. Based on the faction you join, you will be able to receive various benefits. However, be aware that joining a particular faction could also make you a target of another faction. Player's choice: do not join any of the factions. But I didn't want to belong to any of them. On one occasion, the Korean patriotic community offered me a Japanese whore in exchange for joining their faction. To be honest, it was a disgusting offer. They seemed to have thought I was gauging them from their reaction when I refused the offer. The recruiter started shooting off his dirty mouth, suspecting that I was considering taking another faction's offer and babbling about how I should think about the future of the Korean faction and so on. I was even asked if I liked men. Maybe I'm just a fool who knows nothing about the ways of the world, but I just didn't want to throw away my humanity. #Journal, page 11, Camp Roberts. We just got a report of an outbreak in San Francisco. Due to the nature of the camp, being isolated from the outside world, the news is always a few days late. Judging by how fast the plague spread in Asia, the San Francisco Bay Area, the region spanning cities such as Oakland, Berkeley, San Jose, etc., might have turned into pandemonium by now, no matter how prepared they were. As if to prove my thoughts true, several transport vehicles with refugees flooded into the camp the next dawn. There were people of several different races, but they were mostly white and black. They seemed to be survivors that managed to escape San Francisco. Tension showed on the face of the soldiers. It was an obvious reaction as there might have been an infected one among the survivors. A vaccine for Morgellons hasn't been discovered yet. Once infected, there's no way to stop it from turning a human into a monster. The refugees clamored to separate the survivors from themselves. But as if they were scared to get kicked out, the survivors decided to give up the place they were originally assigned to, and instead, settled in a temporary tent camp located at the western part of the base, beyond the water tower. Shortly after evening, when the rationing ended, I heard that some of the refugees were plotting to escape the camp. I advise, LVL4 Insight, you can choose to leave the base along with the refugees, report it to the officers, or stay silent and do nothing. If you leave the base, the tutorial will be immediately terminated. If you report it to the officers, you will gain the US military's favor, but there will be a downward revision to your relationship with some of the refugees. If you stay silent, there will be a slight downward revision to your willpower. Player's choice: do nothing. For a second, I thought about running away with them, to escape from the camp out to the safer central area. But if I did that, I'd then have to worry about surviving out in the wild. Or even before that, I could be shot to death if I were to be found. Another choice I had was to report it to the officers, but I didn't feel like doing that either. Because if I did, people would know. In a situation like that, I had to avoid doing things that would provoke others' hatred, or else, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So I just decided to stay silent. I felt a bit guilty for shutting my eyes to it. Willpower has been adjusted downward, unable to identify the specific figure. The sound of gunshots cracked across the night sky of Camp Roberts. I tried to shut my ears and force myself to sleep, but I couldn't fall back asleep. When I came out at dawn, I found part of the fence splattered with blood. Pieces of torn flesh and tattered clothes were hanging on the fence. Traces of death were laid on the other side of the fence across the barren land. There were some vultures already feasting on them. I lost my appetite. I had to skip breakfast. #Journal, page 16, Camp Roberts. The infection has spread even further across America. An unknown number of the infected were reported to have slipped through the San Francisco Bay blockade, and 4 days later, another piece of news regarding the fall of Sacramento reached our ears. Despite the mass deployment of federal and state defense forces, it wasn't enough to stop the mutated civilians. According to the report, about 70% of the city's population have turned into walking corpses. If converted to numbers, it was over 300,000 people. Although the mutated people don't possess the intelligence of humans, their physical ability easily surpasses that of human beings. The waves of walking corpses have already swept through several refugee camps in the suburbs. The U.S. military dropped several atomic bombs on the east side of the city after conducting as many rescue operations as possible. It was merely a stopgap measure. China, the first country that collapsed due to the Morgellons outbreak, was a nuclear nation. When the plague spread out of control even after deploying military forces, China, without the slightest hesitation, used a large number of nuclear weapons in the infected area. People criticized the Chinese government for abandoning their people, but they didn't seem to care about the criticisms. The infected people are not humans anymore, or that's what they said, but I'm sure there were people who hadn't yet evacuated from the bombed area. Immediately after using nuclear weapons, the number of infected dropped considerably. The government once again deployed their military forces and things appeared to be under control. But after a while, the infection once again spread across China, this time much more rapidly. Experts claim that it's highly likely that the material contaminated with the Morgellons pathogen was blown into the sky by the updraft of the nuclear explosions and then sprayed back down to the ground by the prevailing wind along with the nuclear fallout. The use of nuclear weapons only led China down the path of destruction. And as far as I know, the climate of the west coast is heavily influenced by the westerly winds. If they drop a bomb in Sacramento, matter contaminated with plague pathogens will spread to the central part of the U.S. I don't know whether they realize this or not, but the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has only ordered the residents of California, Nevada, and Arizona to evacuate their land. All hell broke loose in our refugee camp. People began to run riot because of the evacuation order. And when some of the radical riots knocked down the fences, the U.S. military began to open fire on the crowds. Come to think of it, I bet even the soldiers were dying to escape. Overwhelmed by anxiety, fatigue, and depression, the soldiers must have lost their reason when everything happened. Due to this event, more than 700 people were killed in just a few minutes. It was a horrible tragedy. Only later did I find out that there was also a case of mutation reported in San Miguel when the riot occurred. Both the southern and northern routes are swarming with the infected, which is why the federal government has given up on evacuating the refugees. The U.S. military stationed in the camp is also stranded in Camp Roberts. Some ill-tempered soldiers started to beat up refugees. They must be thinking that the reason they were left to die here was all because of the refugees. Chapter 2. Food's running out. The last time the government sent relief supplies via helicopter was a week ago. There are too many places in need of help, but the number of aircrafts available is limited. The use of ground vehicles was discontinued long ago because of the risk of losing the supplies. It seems like the military here is still in touch with the U.S. government, but it's clear that the government is losing control over the California area. Hygiene products have long since run out of stock. People are becoming even more vicious. The camp is already greeting late autumn, but we're still not prepared for winter. Not to mention food and water, we still have to look for ways to keep ourselves warm until the end of the upcoming winter. The commanding officer summoned the representatives of the refugees and gathered their opinions. Apparently, the consensus was to organize a procurement team made up of volunteers. A former police officer, one of the survivors from San Francisco, was put in charge of the procurement team's management. The volunteers will be given priority for ration stamps, so if the camp were to suffer a shortage of food, those who didn't volunteer will more likely starve to death. Still, many refuse to go out and have opted to stay inside the camp. They probably think it's better to die from starvation in a safe place rather than to be eaten alive outside. There's also the possibility that a food shortage won't occur, therefore, the U.S. military hasn't urged the people to participate in the mission. Dispatching unwilling people who refuse to listen to orders would pose an even greater danger to the mission. Player's choice: join the procurement team. But I'm different. If I were to become exhausted due to insufficient nutrition, I could die not from starvation, but other reasons. If that's the case, I want to at least struggle till the very end before I die. When I went to the recruitment center to volunteer for the procurement team, Lieutenant Robert Capstone, one of the officers that happened to be there, dragged me out of the building. He was one of the softliners among the U.S. officers. Noting that I was the only one among the middlemen who didn't belong to any faction, he asked me if I was being left out because of my age. He also told me to reconsider my decision, for he would spare me some of the ration stamps. I advise, LVL for insight, you can either accept or decline Robert Capstone's offer. If you accept, there will be an upward revision to the stability of the community and your leadership within the community. You may also gain favors from the soft line officers. If you decline, there will be an upward revision to your willpower, charm, and leadership. Player's choice, volunteer for the procurement mission anyway. I thanked him for his kindness and refused his offer. I told him that I didn't want to wait helplessly within the camp's enclosure and that I'd rather make myself useful to the people in the camp. Hearing my words, Lieutenant Capstone gave me a wistful glance and stepped aside in silence. He then patted me on my shoulder as I walked past him. Good people do exist even in times of crisis. I'm glad there's still a person like him in this world. Procurement Mission 1, Camp Roberts. The game worked as follows. The background story was provided to the player through visual footage, like videos and journals, but it differed based on presets such as nationality, gender, age, occupation, characteristics, and starting point, which the player had to enter beforehand. Interestingly, the game would always provide players with different background stories even if players chose the same presets. And that's the reason why the boy was spending his time listening to the journal, which had been provided to him in the form of a monologue, even when this was already his 27th attempt at the game. Except for a few cases, journals contained a lot of information regarding the setting of the game, so the boy had to take in as many details as possible. It should have been a boring task for someone who had already gone through this process 26 times. But thanks to the fact that the setting of the game became more and more sophisticated after each attempt, he found it rather interesting. In addition, the game projected the contents of the journal in front of the boy's eyes, as if he were watching the situation unfolding through the character's eyes, only, he wasn't the one in control. But now that the journal had concluded, control was given back to him. The boy looked around. Underneath the dawning sky, rows of tents pitched with old muddy pieces of fabric were aligned along the fences. Not far away, the boy heard a dull thud as he followed the hologram in charge of guiding him to his mission, a sound that he wouldn't have recognized if this had been his first attempt at the game. It was the sound of something sharp being stabbed into human flesh. And sure enough, as the boy walked towards the direction the sound had come from, he found a woman holding a knife in her hands and a middle-aged man crouching on the ground while clutching his stomach. With a clinking noise, the bloody knife dropped from the woman's hand onto the ground. The woman then looked around and found the boy staring at her. Startled by his sudden appearance, the woman stood frozen to her spot for a while, but soon, she walked up to the middle-aged man, took out some crumpled ration stamps from his pockets and ran away in a hurry. The only thing the boy did in the face of this sudden event was to look at the scene with a frown. He knew that those who committed this kind of crime were usually underlings in a faction. If he were to follow her now, he might have to deal with the whole faction. In this virtual world of days after apocalypse, the greatest threat was, in fact, none other than the live humans. Humans do anything to survive. Even those of good faith would commit murder if forced to. This game was made impossible to proceed without killing others. A system message: you have 77 unread viewers' messages. Check the message log to read the messages. Was displayed at the corner of the boy's view. Actually, the notification had been flickering for quite a while now. The boy opened the message log with reluctance. A translucent window containing several messages divided into 3 different tabs: General Messages, System Messages, and Viewers Messages popped up in the air. When he tapped on the Viewers Messages tab, messages of various colors filled the boy's view. Princess Catitude: Appa, why aren't you chasing her? Murd 3R, go follow and kill her. Thinking is for pussies, just do it. You Murd 3R, therefore you are. A man's gotta kill and fuck. Who's the real man? You're the real man. How real? Goddamn real. Just don't touch her lower half, cuz you're gonna need that to fuck her. Legend 12, dude, you are fucking crazy. Do you even realize how young this kid is? Kashmir, I don't think the age restriction applies to people with afterlife insurance. Vandacum, I see him oral fag, golden_spoon, fucking morons. The boy felt like he got struck on the back of his head. Of all attempts, this was his first time turning on the streaming service. He quickly closed the message window, but opened it again after a while and carefully inserted a message. It didn't take him long to enter the message thanks to the teletype module, which turned the user's thoughts into sentences in just a second and automatically translated them if there was a language barrier. Hanjai eel, as I said earlier, I won't allow backseating. And please, watch your language. He then quickly closed the window. The boy saw an explosive increase in the number of incoming messages, but he didn't dare to read them. For some reason, the boy felt disgusted. The stone, which he had forgotten about, started rolling around, hurting his heart. The boy hurried his gait in an effort to disregard the pain. Several missions were displayed inside the boy's field of view. This would be an important decision since things would change drastically depending on the choice he made here. However, the boy headed straight to a place that he had in mind. There was a long line of military vehicles waiting at the destination. They were quite different from those he had seen in his lifetime. It was obvious since the game was set in the early 21st century, a bygone era. The control eye, which responded to the user's subconscious, displayed the names of the vehicles for him. At the head and tail of the line, there were jeeps named Humvee, armed with machine guns, and right at the center of the line were a couple of military tank trucks tagged as M978A2, presumably for procuring oil. The rest were normal trucks painted with camouflage patterns. The traffic near the vehicles was being strictly regulated to prevent refugees from taking them. Right by the vehicles was a long line of people queuing to join the procurement mission. The boy also stood at the back of the line and patiently waited for his turn. Looking ahead of the line, the boy saw that the applicants were given bulletproof jackets, gas masks, and duffel bags after being frisked. When the boy's turn came, the master sergeant grumbled with a disapproving look, "Too small. Are we really using a kid for this mission?" "We're not the ones to choose, sir," the staff sergeant standing next to him replied bluntly. Though the boy wasn't acquainted with the master sergeant, he was somewhat familiar with the staff sergeant who, after casting a side glance, continued, "Apparently, Lieutenant RoboCop is fond of him. He said he volunteered for this mission to be of help to others." RoboCop was Robert Capstone's nickname. "And you're buying it?" "He doesn't belong to any of the refugee factions. He's fluent in English and seems to have learned some Japanese and Chinese recently. I'd say his language skills will be useful to manage the refugees." Japanese and Chinese were skills that the boy had acquired by investing his experience points. Although others may hear him as if he were speaking different languages, it wasn't actually his own competence. It was more like an ingrained translator that automatically translated the words he spoke and heard. In an apocalyptic world where social interaction was an important factor, the ability to speak different languages was one of the most important survival skills. "Boy, how old are you?" asked the master sergeant. And again, the control eye responded to the user's will and displayed some possible answers in front of his eyes. The answers that the eye provided differed based on one's intelligence stat, or the level of leadership type skills such as insight detection and deception. But the boy answered frankly. There was no need to lie anyway. 17. 17? Not 12? Damn, you Asians look so young I can hardly tell your age. After another grumble, the master sergeant gestured to one of his subordinates to inspect him. After confirming that the boy wasn't hiding anything, the private handed the boy the same items that the other applicants were provided with. The master sergeant then warned the boy not to take off the gas mask during the mission unless he was ordered to. There was no evidence proving that the epidemic was airborne, but there wasn't any that disproved it either. After passing by the inspection station, the boy followed the path and went into the makeshift barracks. Once he entered, a soldier guided him to a seat next to the Koreans. Some of them turned around and greeted the boy. Though he didn't want to, he returned the greetings, for it would do him no good to ignore them. After waiting for the seats to be filled, Lieutenant Robert Capstone came up to the podium and made a gesture towards a soldier. Light shot out from an overhead projector and onto a white screen at the front. What appeared on the screen was a map. The lieutenant looked around at the refugees for a second and called some names. The boy's name was also called. If you were called, please come forward and help me deliver my words in your respective language. When the boy and other people nodded, he tapped his finger against the microphone to draw attention and began to give the people a briefing about the map on the screen. What you are seeing here is a map of the San Miguel County. As you can see, it's not a big town. It had a population of about 3,300, but now there's no one left. Now, our first goal is to reach the only gas station in the town. Right where his finger was pointing was the entry to the village from Route 101, and there was a gas station right above it. The convoy will stop here to fill up the tank trucks with fuel. Meanwhile, you will be split into two groups and move to other areas to procure supplies. The first group will be heading to a church located 2 blocks south of the gas station. Since it was used as a temporary shelter when the evacuation order was issued, there's a good chance of finding a considerable amount of supplies left inside the building. The second group will be moving a bit further away. 4 blocks north from the gas station there's a street full of restaurants and a flour factory. Since it's located further away from the gas station, there's a higher chance of encountering monsters, but it's also the place where we can expect the most to find food, so it's worth the risk. The lieutenant then looked back at the people. So, as you've all heard, there's a greater risk of encountering monsters if you head towards the flour factory. I know you all have bravely volunteered for this mission, but I'd like to ask you one more time. If anyone wants to join the second group, please raise your hand. The boy immediately raised his hand after interpreting the lieutenant's words. To the rest of the people there, it appeared that the boy had spoken only to himself as he raised his hand. People, including Lieutenant Capstone, looked at the boy with newfound interest. Because he was the only one who raised his hand. System messages notifying him of upward revisions to favor continuously popped up for quite a few seconds. It seemed like he had earned more favor from the soldiers rather than the refugees. One of the messages even had the words permanent revision in it. You have earned the favor of Corporal Elliot. There will be an upward revision to Corporal Elliot's favor. There will be a permanent upward revision to Corporal Elliot's favor. Unable to identify the specific figure. Relationships in real life could easily change. Even if 2 people became best friends, the relationship may not last forever. And just like in real life, the favor a person in-game held towards the player would also decrease over time or when hostile events occurred. However, a permanent revision was different. This figure would never decline no matter what happened. The last sentence of the message put a frown on the boy's expression. The reason why the figures were unidentifiable was that he lacked the required level of insight. It's probably only a little. The boy didn't suppose the deficit to be a lot. Anyone else? Lieutenant Capstone asked one more time, but everyone was busy watching the others' reactions. Although he had praised them for being brave, he knew that most of them were only here for the ration stamps. The lieutenant put on a sour face. I have a question. The boy raised his hand, to which the lieutenant nodded. there's a limit to the amount of supplies an individual can carry with a bag. I think we could collect a lot more supplies if we were to use the trucks. Is there any reason why we aren't using them? The boy already knew the answer to the question. It would have been asked by another refugee if he didn't ask, so he did it just to quicken the process. Lieutenant Capstone nodded at the boy and ordered a soldier to display the satellite pictures. Good question. That's actually the plan B for the mission I was about to explain, so everyone please pay attention. This is an image captured by satellite of the San Miguel County after the evacuation order was issued. Do you see these cars blocking the roads? This is the reason why we can't use the trucks. Some people ran into each other's cars due to the panic generated by the evacuation order. Only if we get rid of these cars, we'll be able to deploy the trucks. If you manage to do it, notify us via radio. But be aware that the noise produced when clearing these obstacles may attract the infected people. If that happens, we'll immediately cancel Plan B and return to Plan A, which involves personally carrying the supplies. The assessment will be made by the soldiers accompanying you, so please, do not act alone and follow the orders given. The question period continued for a few moments in which Lieutenant Capstone gave sincere answers to all of the questions. When the session was about to reach its end, one of the refugees asked the most useless question: how many ration stamps would the participants get after completing the mission? For a second after hearing the question, the lieutenant had a lost look on his face, but he soon answered. We'll provide you with 3 days' worth of ration stamps, but you may be rewarded with more stamps based on your attitude and performance on this mission. As soon as the lieutenant finished answering, the sentence, the rewards may vary depending on the assessment of the accompanying soldiers, was added to the quest window. Though it was something he had already experienced several times before, the boy couldn't erase the thought that it was a little unfair. If he were to get assigned to the team accompanied by a soldier with a racist character, there was a high chance that he wouldn't be able to get a fair assessment. If there are no more questions, we'll now begin the map exercise. The mission you have volunteered to participate in is dangerous. You must fully familiarize yourself with the surroundings in order to avoid panicking in the middle of the mission, thus preventing unforeseen accidents. After Lieutenant Capstone finished his speech, several corporals came forward and gathered the participants to start the map exercise. Map exercise was a training that aimed to help the soldiers acquaint themselves with the geographic features of the operation area and the operation itself. For players, this practice was also an opportunity to acquire a mini-map. However, not all characters could acquire the same mini-map from this exercise. Characters that had invested enough in intelligence points or learned the skill map reading could acquire a complete mini-map, while those who didn't would receive an inferior version that contained some errors and empty spaces here and there. Before starting the map exercise, people were picked by lot to go to the flower factory, because only one person, the boy, had volunteered himself. Those who were chosen had a miserable scowl on their faces. The map exercise didn't take long to complete because the size of San Miguel County was so small. It was quite obvious since this mission was supposed to be the tutorial. It'd be bad if it were too difficult. Chapter 3. The procurement mission commenced after a few more practice sessions of basic tactical maneuvers and hand signals, which the boy thought were just for the sake of formalities. Who'd be able to memorize so many things in merely an hour? A lot of people showed up to see the mission team off. It was something that the boy couldn't understand. He decided to shrug it off, thinking that if he had a higher level of insight, he would have been able to read their thoughts. And as soon as that thought crossed his mind, the control eye responded to it and displayed an advice message. I advise, LVL for insight, you have unused experience points. Experience points can be used to acquire various skills. Your character's base stats can be upgraded by acquiring more skills. The amount of experience points consumed may vary depending on your level of knowledge regarding that particular skill. Sufficient information and knowledge of the skill will result in a cost reduction. Information about skills can be obtained from books or NPCs, You may also use keywords to search for a particular skill at the cost of experience points. Skills acquired in previous attempts can be learned for a reduced amount of experience points. The amount of points reduced depends on the number of times you acquire the skill in previous trials. Despite the large consumption of experience points, learning a completely new skill can be advantageous. It rests with you to choose. It was something he was already aware of. The boy opened his skills window. The window showed a list of skills he had acquired with the experience points granted to him at the start of the game. Below the list of acquired skills were the skills he hadn't yet learned. The list didn't include skills that he didn't know of. The boy, however, didn't bother looking for unknown skills. Unless he were to come across a skill by chance, he would have to either waste his time searching through books and bribing NPCs or waste his experience points by trying out keywords to find skills that he wasn't even sure existed. Not only that, he would have to spend a ton of experience points to learn the skills for the first time. It was due to one of the game's mechanics, which the players called ignorance penalty. Although the ignorance penalty was a big obstacle, learning a brand new skill wasn't necessarily a bad idea. For example, a player could learn medical skills to a high level even if they knew nothing about medicine. Of course, they'd have to spend a lot of experience points, but it could come in handy in times of emergency. Fortunately, skills that one had acquired at least once during previous attempts weren't subjected to the ignorance penalty. Rather, previously learned skills had an advantage applied to them. In other words, one can learn and train the same skills for fewer experience points. However, this benefit would only apply until the skill reached its previous highest level. This, along with the bonus effects granted for completing achievements, were the only advantages players with multiple playthroughs had. Previously, the boy had allotted his experience points primarily on battle skills. He was able to raise quite a few levels with those few experience points he had. Of course, that had also led him to multiple bad endings in his previous attempts. Level 9 Close Combat, Level 10 Melee Weapon Mastery, Level 8 Small Arms Mastery. After distributing his experience points, the boy saw Corporal Elliot, the one in charge of management, writing something on a notebook with a green cover. Judging by the date written at the top, it seemed to be a diary. Noticing the boy's stare, Corporal Elliot covered the diary with one arm. "I don't know how manners work in your country, but don't you think it's rude to look at others' diaries?" "Oh, sorry. I wasn't reading your diary." "Well, I didn't write anything special in it." The corporal then closed his diary. The boy saw a button flickering in a corner of his view. It was a time acceleration button, a feature used to skip the waiting time before a mission, but the boy just ignored it. It was a bad idea to use the acceleration option in the early stages of the game, as every small event and trivial relationship around this point would be useful in the future. And just as expected, someone was already striking up a conversation with him. "Hey, kid. What's your name?" A mestizo soldier asked for the boy's name. Though his English pronunciation was flawless, the name written on his name tag suggested that he wasn't Anglo-American. Guilherme, even though it was written in English, the boy had no idea how to pronounce his name. The advice window also showed a set of illegible symbols, which meant it was in a language he didn't know. "It's Jail. Jo.wool. Yup. It means winter in Korean. It sounds similar to mine. And your name is?" The soldier seemed to have found the boy interesting. "He seems amazed at how you can remain calm when all the others look nervous and hesitant. He must be thinking you are very bold. 72% probability of containing errors. A higher level of insight or higher intelligence stat is necessary to reduce the probability of error." The boy thought it was a rather obvious answer. The soldier answered, "You can call me Guilherme." "Okay, Private Guilherme. Just call me Guilherme." The fellow soldiers laughed. It was because the expression "nem," the Korean honorific, was translated into "sir." The private grumbled, telling the boy not to make fun of him like that. There wasn't much time to converse inside the vehicle, as their destination was only 5 kilometers away from the camp. The town's outline was already beginning to dimly come into view. Even from a distance, it looked very bleak and dreary, spreading agitation among the participants. The private also said with a loud sigh, "Damn, the town's looking pretty spooky. I thought it'd be good to take a stroll around after being stuck in that camp for such a freaking long time, but I take that back." The convoy drove along Route 101 leading to the upcoming junction and past the town since the gas station was located in the southernmost area of the town. As the convoy began to slow down, the boy caught sight of a logo composed of 2 blue and red angled stripes below the name of a famous oil corporation, Chevron. Taking a key out of his pocket to unlock a gun case, Corporal Elliott then addressed the participants, "As you all have been instructed, do not try to run away. There are patrol planes out there ready to shoot down anything that crosses the east border. Follow the orders if you want to make it out alive. Those who disobey will be sentenced and punished on the spot. Do you understand?" The participants nodded with dark complexions. Several infected mutants came out from the town attracted by the noise of the vehicles. Letting out growling voices, the mutants began to run towards the vehicles. Despite their weird posture, they were reaching the vehicles at a terrifying pace. But before they could reach the vehicles, a soldier sitting on the foremost Humvee fired his rifle. On their way to the vehicles, the mutants crumpled on the ground one by one, accompanied by wind-piercing sounds. Even after getting shot, some of the mutants still tried to crawl their way over. "Get back to your seats. The others will handle them." Corporal Elliott tried to calm down the participants, but they didn't seem to listen. A soldier sitting on the opposite side, Private Blake, grumbled, "I thought San Miguel would be safer thanks to the evacuation order. How come the mutants are already here to welcome us?" "They must be from another area," Private Guilherme responded curtly, keeping his eyes and rifle pointed towards the outside. Soon after and without further gunfire, the convoy was able to reach the gas station. While the tank trucks got to their positions, the participants were handed some guns and machetes before getting off. Despite having selected people with good mental health, the soldiers had to stay alert in case someone started shooting at others. "Get off." With the soldiers at the front, the participants carefully got down from the cars. Some of the soldiers in charge of leading them proceeded to do a head count while the others stood guard. In the meantime, the boy heard a disgruntled voice coming from the gas station. "Why won't this damned pump work?" A soldier seemed to have problems dealing with the pump. He put his finger under his winter cap and scratched his head. A handful of dandruff fell on his shoulder like snow. It seemed that the soldiers were also out of the cleaning products. Either that or he was just lazy. Remember, stick to the plan. If it's safe enough, clear the roadblocks and we'll deploy the trucks. If not, fill the duffel bags with supplies and return. We have some extra bags here, you may try making several trips until it's dark. We'll evaluate your contributions and reward you individually. I hope you all do your best." The participants nodded. "Then let's begin. As previously announced, we'll be defending from behind. Please take the lead in order." The soldiers then went to the rear row. Although the participants put on sour faces, no one could raise a complaint. After all, it was them who had volunteered for this mission even after being reminded of the risks. Public Service Announcement, 2040, KBS, in an old town, in an alleyway between dilapidated houses. The screen showed an old man picking up scrap papers and cardboard boxes. The tattered edges of his sleeves swayed with the autumn breeze. The old man trembled as his poorly patched up clothes weren't enough to protect him from the chilling wind. A girl passed by, peeking at the old man and covering her nose with her hand. The old man dropped his head in embarrassment. A phrase seemingly representing his inner thoughts appeared on one corner of the screen. "I can have dinner if I sell these." The scene changed. It now showed a steeply sloping road. The old man was trying to pull the handcart up the hill, but it didn't seem to be easy. His body looked too small compared to the handcart loaded with tons of scraps. The sun was setting behind the old man. Then, the warm voice of the female narrator followed. The man's name is Park Wootial. He turned 86 years old this year. He makes a living by selling scrap papers. Even though he receives 630,000 won every month from the National Pension Service, it's not enough. The minimum cost of living for a single-person household is estimated to be 1,645,053 won per month. Prices go up every year, but the National Pension Fund, which has run dry long ago, has been in limbo for years. Life is so hard for the elderly in Korea. The old man finally managed to climb up the hill. The camera zoomed in on the old man's face. His wrinkly forehead was beaded with sweat. The scene once again changed and showed the old man selling the papers. The owner of the scrap store was classifying the papers while the old man waited anxiously by his side. The owner tapped on a calculator a few times, which showed the number 13,325. The old man then gave him a pocket that had been hanging next to the handcart. It contained a few valuable scraps such as aluminum cans and rusty iron. The owner weighed them and tapped on the calculator a few more times. This time, it showed a little more than 20,000. The owner paid him 21,000 won, to which the old man bowed his head several times in gratitude. The narrator spoke once again. Mr. Park is not the worst case. Several scrap dealers in Seoul have closed down due to the laws and regulations for waste, and many of the elderly cannot even sell scrap papers anymore. They have to live off of their monthly pension. The screen now displayed the old man's room. Even though it was a small room, it appeared spacious due to the lack of furniture. The old man lay down on the cold bare floor with only a blanket to cover himself with. He fiddled with his old TV, but it didn't seem to be working. For lack of anything better to do, he closed his eyes. He pulled up the blanket over his head and curled up to keep himself warm. I have to save the briquettes for winter. It was not a matter of saving, but survival. I wonder how Sui-young is doing. The screen changed to show his daughter, who he had raised. The narrator continued with her sentimental voice, parents tend not to lean on their children, and we understand it. We know how hard it is to survive in this tough world even without being burdened by them, so they choose to live on their own. But is this really the right thing to do? The screen shifted once again. Engineers were building facilities and scientists were absorbed in experiments. 3D models of human brains, images of firing neurons. Everything was shown in a bright atmosphere that contrasted dramatically with the previous scene. What was shown next were scenes of various people smiling happily. A young woman enjoying her summer in a valley was captioned 92 years old An Myung, and a young man walking on a field filled with flowers was captioned 88 years old Choi Diang. The advertisement didn't stop there. It showed many other elderly people living a happy life in a young body as if they had gone back in time. The era of living is in the past. We are now in the era of existence. Convert your national pension into afterlife insurance and experience an eternal life of freedom and unlimited happiness. Afterlife insurance will cover your life after death. Now, the screen showed the sad side of old man Park Wootial and the joyous side of countless people living in virtual realities with cross-cut edits. Don't worry about the brain transference operation. The probability of an operation failure is lower than the probability of an airplane crash. Our world's most renowned life support device and neural connector will keep your brain healthy beyond your lifespan. If you aren't familiar with virtual reality, try visiting our experience facility. You may experience the worlds we have to offer and choose the world you'd like to live in. The virtual reality experience facility is open to the public year-round. The experience facilities appeared to be neat and tidy. The elderly came in twos and threes and tried on the virtual reality devices. They laughed in satisfaction. Among them was Park Wootial. The screen displayed a young man walking on a flowery path with a broad smile on his face. Afterlife insurance will return your life to you. The advertisement ended with the image of a fluttering Korean flag. This campaign is joined by the Korea Public Service Advertisement Council, the National Pension Service and the Afterlife Insurance Corporation. Chapter 4. Gas stations located along the national highway usually had hostels and restaurants in their vicinity. The one in San Miguel was no exception. There were a couple of Spanish restaurants right across the road and a small hostel next to them. With the soldiers keeping watch, the participants, now armed with firearms and machetes, started by searching those first. The two restaurants were soon filled with participants. The place was so crowded that if mutants were to appear right now, the participants probably wouldn't be able to react properly, so the boy decided to stay out. The rest of the participants looked extremely enthusiastic. The boy presumed that they were trying to earn the soldiers' recognition by showing their commitment now that they were in a relatively safe area. Some of them even started fighting inside the building, and the noise they made was so loud he could hear them from outside. Fortunately, everyone made it out alive. The building seemed to be free of mutants, but that didn't mean that everyone had emerged unscathed. It was obvious that a wild brawl had taken place inside the building. One participant even came out sobbing with his bag torn and without his gas mask, but he had to go back inside after getting berated for losing his mask. A man with a bulky frame came out swaggering, his bag full of supplies. Much to the boy's shame, the man was Korean. It was particularly embarrassing because he knew that this world's characters were created by analyzing the data of certain age groups from the period the game was set on. The man asked the boy to translate his words, which the boy did with reluctance. "I've done my part. I don't want to go out anymore." The soldiers and officers looked at the man with disgust on their faces. Corporal Elliot grumbled in a low voice, "I knew someone would do that, but still. Shit." The man asked the boy to translate back, but the boy pretended he didn't hear him. Following the orders of Private Guilherme and Corporal Elliot, the 10 participants embarked on their journey to the flour factory. They had to move 3 blocks east and 4 blocks north to get there. It would have been nothing more than a simple stroll if not for the Morgellons outbreak. The boy volunteered to take the lead, eliciting a concerned look from the soldiers behind. Even though he had a gun and a knife with him, he was still a boy. However, the boy was confident. He had his level 9 close combat, level 10 melee weapon mastery, and above all, experience. There were cars obstructing various parts of the road. The team proceeded as the participants pushed the cars to the sides while the soldiers watched their backs. The dark and empty houses that peeked over the fences looked very forlorn and desolate. "Halt," Corporal Elliot ordered as he raised his clenched fist. The rest of the people lowered their postures and started eyeing around like scared animals. Much to their relief, there wasn't any mutant around them. The boy followed the corporal's eyes and saw a flagpole. 2 flags were hanging up on the pole. One was the familiar Star-Spangled Banner, but he didn't recognize the other one. "What's that flag?" "That's the flag of California. And that building over there, it's a fire station." "I didn't see it during the map exercise," Private Guilherme answered. Indeed, the words California Republic were written on the flag, underneath the picture of a bear. The corporal decided to explore the fire station. Although they probably wouldn't find any food, medical supplies such as painkillers, antibiotics, and bandages were also crucial for survival. Not just that, they might also find fire trucks which could be used to carry water in long-distance journeys. Even the smallest 5-ton fire truck can hold over 3,000 liters of water. This time again, the boy decided to stand at the group's front. The soldiers advised him to take turns rotating with the other participants, but he insisted on leading the group. A message popped up, notifying him of a slight upward revision to the 2 soldiers' favor, but that didn't bring the boy that much happiness. He couldn't bother with the small stuff. The fire station was just a single-story building, presumably due to the small size of the town. There was an office right next to the garage, but unfortunately, nothing was visible from outside the window. The boy knocked on the door with the back of his knife, hard enough for those inside to hear, but not for those far away. Afraid that the boy's actions would attract the mutants to them, one of the participants ran up to him and grabbed him by his collar. "Hey, leave him alone," said Private Guilherme, pointing his gun towards the man and flicking it to one side. He then added that if it were really dangerous, he would have stopped the boy. However, the man slowly backed away and collapsed onto the floor while trembling. Something had knocked on the door from the inside. Putting his ear against the door, the boy heard a soft growl. It wasn't a sound that a human would make, it was a mutant. The boy shook his head at the two soldiers who were preparing to open fire. He then grabbed the doorknob with one hand, holding his machete in the other one. "I'll take care of it." "Okay, now you're seriously out of your mind." While Private Guilherme shook his head, Corporal Elliot asked the boy if he was sure of this, to which the boy answered with a nod. "All right. If you think you can do it." Rather than trusting the boy, he believed that the participants needed some sort of stimulus. Still, he didn't want the boy to get hurt, as that would only produce the opposite effect. Therefore, the corporal placed his finger on the trigger, ready to shoot at any moment. The boy pictured the mutant on the opposite side of the door. If it was a firefighter in their suit, there wouldn't be many weak spots to stab. His thoughts were concise and his actions swift. When he twisted the doorknob, the mutant that had been pushing against it fell out from the room and onto the floor. The boy quickly kicked its helmet off, stepped on its back and stabbed his machete into its head. With a loud crunching sound, the blade penetrated its skull. The blood-mixed brain fluid oozed out from the crack and the mutant fell into a fit of convulsion. He had killed something that used to be human with his own hands. The boy then experienced a sensation akin to an electric current running through his hands. That very sensation was the reason he had chosen this game. The boy stayed still until the sensation completely vanished, then retrieved the knife with a flick of his wrist. "Hey, you all right?" "I'm good." Private Guilherme asked the boy with a hint of worry, but the boy answered as calmly as ever. The private then expressed his admiration in a strong language. "Damn, you're such a badass." Next, the first one to enter the office was also the boy. Once again, there was a slight upward revision to the favor of the soldiers. It didn't mean much, but as they say, many a little makes a mickle. The office was a bit long in proportion to its width. Inside, he found a bunch of keys lying on top of a pile of papers. He also took two guns that were lying on the table. While the rest of the people stood there gawking, the boy quickly opened the emergency medical kit hanging on the wall and swept its contents into his bag. "Hey, a middle-aged man came up to the boy. "We have to share fair dues. If you take everything, what about us?" The boy stared back in silence, which made the man flinch, probably threatened by the blood dripping down from the machete in the boy's hand. The man eventually turned back without saying more. The boy didn't waste time and continued searching through the office. Soon, the boy found 3 sets of buttons on the wall, presumably the switches to lift the garage's shutters. The boy then looked at the soldiers to ask for permission. Elliot, who was standing near the door, gave him a nod as a sign of clearance. The boy then pressed the buttons without further hesitation. The sound of motors activating was heard as soon as he pressed the buttons. When the boy stepped out of the office to check the shutters, he saw the people outside keeping watch with their guns ready to shoot. Crunch. Bang. What the hell? One of the participants shouted at the sudden noise. When everyone looked at the direction of the noise, they saw the boy on the floor next to a mutant with a machete stuck in its head. There was also a bullet hole on the ground right next to the boy. It seemed like someone had panicked at the appearance of the mutant and pulled the trigger. The boy saw the number of viewers' messages drastically go up. He opened the message window for a moment and found that most of the viewers were poking fun at him with comments like, "He almost died lol." Some of them were even urging him to kill the one who shot at him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shoot you." An old-looking woman lowered her head repeatedly. "I'm okay, so please lower your voice." But the boy waved his hand as if it was nothing. Lines of notifications once again popped up and filled the corner of his view. "I'm not even joking, you are seriously a badass. How can you be so reckless?" Corporal Elliot said with a hollow laugh. "Is that a problem?" "No, not at all. In fact, you're much more helpful than someone who'd let a kid stand at the front and refuse to come forward." After finishing his exchange with the corporal, the boy went on and looked around the garage. There were 2 vehicles parked in it, an ambulance and a fire truck. The rest of the parking spaces were empty. The boy asked the corporal if he was planning to take those vehicles back to the gas station, and after getting a positive answer, he poured all the medical supplies from his bag into one of them. Corporal Elliot then selected 2 people who could drive and ordered them to take the vehicles to the gas station. "Can we stay at the gas station?" one of the participants that were picked to drive asked carefully, but the corporal pushed them into the car and answered with a scary-looking smile. "Of course you have to come back." His words were, "of course," translated by the boy. And as they didn't have the guts to get on the bad side of the soldiers, they could only glare at the boy before driving off. Corporal Elliot then immediately contacted the main force at the gas station with a radio. He notified them about the 2 vehicles heading there and told them to take the vehicles and the medical supplies inside and have the participants come back to the fire station. After a while, a voice was heard from the radio, asking for a confirmation of the driver's claim that the corporal had allowed them to stay in the cars. The corporal snorted and told them to make sure they came back. While waiting for the 2 to return, the rest of the team searched the surrounding area for food. Now that they were closer to the center of the town, there were cafes, restaurants, and some other stores worth investigating. As the boy hesitated whether to search the cafe or not, Corporal Elliot came over to him. "Look at that board next to the door. It says lunch special, right? I'm sure they did handle some food other than coffee." And indeed, there were some cans of ham and sacks of flour inside the storage room, enough to fill 7 bags. They also took a leftover bag of coffee beans for the officers. It might have lost its flavor, but it was still a luxury item. The team even had some time left to clear the cars blocking the road even after looking through all the nearby stores. Only after the team had finished clearing the road did the 2 drivers show up, lazily trudging up the road. "We don't have ration stamps for those who delay the mission," the corporal warned them, to which the 2 participants started running hurriedly. The boy heard Private Guilherme swearing under his breath. After their rejoining, the team then went 2 blocks north. At last, they were able to reach the intersection next to the flour factory. The boy prepared himself for the next event. There were 2 options that the player could choose from. One was for everyone to fill their bags individually, and the other one was to clear the road and call for the trucks. The latter option would give him more experience points, but he'd have to defend the team from waves of mutants. Even so, the former option wasn't easy either. He'd have to deal with the mutants wandering inside the flour factory. The boy's first bad ending had taken place right here. "Hey, Mr. Badass," Corporal Elliot called the boy rather affectionately. "I'm thinking of calling the trucks, what do you think? I suggest we decide after securing the flour factory." The corporal agreed to his proposal. Chapter 5. The boy was running vigorously on a treadmill. His heart was pounding like crazy and beads of sweat could be seen falling from his forehead down to his chest. The boy's legs were about to give out, but he didn't dare to stop because a trainer was watching right beside him. The vast gym was solely occupied by 2 people, the boy and the trainer. The trainer was an unsympathetic man. He never allowed even a single minute of delay in his schedule. His sunglasses and his always crossed arms gave off an imposing feeling. The boy was supposed to run for 15 minutes, but those 15 minutes felt painfully long. In the first place, he wasn't even exercising out of his own volition. Just when the boy was about to collapse, the alarm in the trainer's wristwatch went off. Only then did the trainer give him the order to stop. "Stop. Move on to the next one. Drenched in sweat, the boy panted heavily for breath as he leaned against the handles of the treadmill. A drop rolled down his face. The boy wasn't sure if it was sweat or a teardrop. After running on the treadmill for a long time, he felt like the ground was wriggling, but before he could catch his breath, the trainer shouted at him. "Come on, move it." The trainer's forceful attitude reminded the boy of the Korean military from the old times. He once heard from his father that the atmosphere was just as bad as this. Of course, his father must have also heard it from another person, since the draft system had been abolished long ago. The boy had been forced into a repeating cycle of anaerobic and aerobic exercises. Although the intensity made it look dangerous, there was a medical team on standby, and the trainer made sure his muscles weren't strained by monitoring his physical condition through sensors attached all over his body. Provided with the information in real time through earbuds, the trainer adjusted the intensity of the exercise. Even when merely running on a treadmill, everything was thoroughly managed so that the boy's heart rate wouldn't go over 85% of its maximum. All of this was to keep the commodity unharmed. The commodity was, of course, the boy's body. This was the boy's last day in the gym before the trade took place. For the trainer, it would be his last day of product management. He would receive additional payment for completing his job, but his facial expressions showed no change. Rather, the boy could sense a subtle stiffness in his behavior. Maybe he was nervous, or he was trying to save his joy for later. But no matter how hard the boy looked, there wasn't a single shred of sympathy or concern among the emotions he showed. The boy was almost certain he was right about him. He had a keen eye for discerning others' feelings, and he had noticed something. After the deal had been set, almost everyone he'd met, even his parents, was treating him not as a human, but a commodity. Of all people, I really didn't want my family to do this to me, the boy thought. Perhaps it was because of this that the boy had been looking for warmth from the people he met. However, no one, not even his trainer with whom he had spent the most time, had ever shown that to him. All of a sudden, the boy felt a red mist descending onto him. It wasn't anything new to him. The boy tried to empty his mind, the pent-up emotions that were trying to burst out of his heart slowly drowned under the wave of silence, sinking deep down into his subconscious. After finishing his training, the boy walked towards the trainer to bid him farewell. "Thank you for everything you've done. I hope it wasn't too hard." But the trainer only answered briefly. "Take good care of your body. You know how expensive it is." Okay. But even so, the boy answered with a warm smile. Soon, people would no longer be able to see him with that body and face. It was the only effort he could make to leave people with a good impression of him. The trainer flinched a little. The boy examined him with curiosity, but he couldn't figure out the reason behind his reaction. It would have been better if he could see his eyes, but to his dismay, the trainer never took off his sunglasses till the very end. It was only after having parted with the trainer that the boy realized he hadn't asked him his name. "I should have asked his name," regretted the boy. Accompanied by several bodyguards, the boy returned to the house where his family was staying along with the medical team. House, but not home. The place was big with a high ceiling. It wasn't the place where the boy used to live. Before he could get off of the car, a small figure came running out of the door. It was his little brother, Parang. "Hyung is here." The boy grabbed his little brother by the waist and lifted him up. Thanks to all the training he had been forced to do, he was able to lift him with ease. Parang opened his mouth in surprise but soon started giggling. Giving his little brother a good hug, the boy asked with a smile, "Hey there, Parang. Have you been a good boy?" "Yes. Like you told me to, I ate all my meals, and I listened to Mom and Dad and sister." "Wow, what a good boy." The rest of his family came out of the house and welcomed the boy with a slightly awkward expression. His parents were acting guilty in front of him, but he could tell it was merely an act since he could sense the expectation flickering across their faces. The boy was still calm even after knowing that. It was because he had long since stopped expecting anything from them. His sister, on the other hand, looked pale and a little worn. She kept avoiding his eyes as though she was ashamed. The boy appreciated the thought but still wanted her to look straight at him so that she could remember him. The boy's father came up to him while scratching his head. He appeared more like a boy than the boy himself. As if life didn't weigh down on him at all. There was something good about that, though, and it was that he was like a friend to him. He was much better than those fathers who couldn't even befriend their sons. But in a situation like this, the boy in his 40s spoke to the little boy, "Welcome home. Has it been a week? Today was your last day of workout, wasn't it?" "Yes." "How have you been?" "We've been doing fine, but that's not important. What's important is how have you been doing? You're the main pillar of our family." "I guess so." The conversation suddenly came to a stop. An awkward silence fell over the family. Unable to tolerate the atmosphere, the boy's mother came forward. "We were waiting for you to have dinner together." "Come in," she said, grabbing the boy's hand. As the boy was led into the house, he turned to look at his sister, who once again looked away. But this time, he could see that her eyes were drowned in tears. The boy was distraught but tried not to show it, because if he did, he knew she would only burst into tears. The boy's sister was born in autumn, so they named her Gil. The same went for the boy. He was born in winter, thus was named Jael. His little brother was born in summer, but they named him Paring because the sky was blue. What a lazy way to name their children, the boy thought when he first heard it from his parents. Just as the boy's mother said, the table was already set for dinner. But there was another table set with only a small quantity of each dish. It was the boy's share. One of the medical staff told him that he would be put on a diet to keep nutritional balance and maintain his body's condition. This must have been why the medical team was here, to manage his diet and lifestyle. Though it was still better than the past 4 months where he only got to meet his family once a week. The dinner was good. The boy knew it wasn't his mom's cooking. His sister, Gil, had been doing all the cooking since she became old enough to cook. Even their mother couldn't match her skills. Thankfully for the boy, the medical team didn't stop her from serving him his meal. All they did was to limit the amount. The boy, however, wouldn't have complained no matter what they did with the meal. He was happy enough that he could see his family every day before the transaction was made. The boy tried to strike up conversations to talk with his family, but none of them lasted long. Judging by their shaky voices and dodgy eyes, it looked like his parents were ill at ease in his company. It was pretty obvious since this deal was illegal and they were selling his body. The boy still tried to lighten the mood with some jokes, but his tactless father made his endeavors useless. It's not a bad thing if you think about it. Do you know how many people out there are committing insurance fraud to benefit from the afterlife insurance? Also, you get to play those virtual reality games all your life without having to worry about studying for Korean SAT or going to work. I bet all the other kids would kill to be in your shoes. The boy managed to feign laughter, but not his sister. Gil furiously lashed out at their father. "How can you say that to him, Dad? You know your son is about to lose his body, right? We won't be able to hold his hand or hug him ever again. Do you think spending the rest of his life stuck in a game sounds fun? Then why don't you go sell your body instead of his?" Gil. Their mother raised her voice. It didn't sound like it was to scold her, it was more to tell her to contain herself in front of the medical team. With her eyes brimming with tears, Gil briefly looked at her brother, Jael, before storming off upstairs. Their father repeatedly said he was okay, but he probably wasn't okay. His body was showing several signs of anger. The boy thought his father didn't deserve to be angry. He felt the stone in his heart rolling around, prodding here and there. The boy had spent his childhood in coldness, in a psychological sense. It was all thanks to his father that he was able to develop his keen sense for reading other people's feelings. His father wasn't particularly a bad person. He was just too in touch with his emotions, just like how kids were. Because of this, he could easily make friends with children. But also because of this, he was easily angered, easily bored, and easily disappointed. It wasn't a characteristic necessary for a good parent to have. He used to be a good father when things were stable, but now, he was putting his whole family to test. And that test was too harsh for his little brother Perrin to endure. Even now, he was rolling his round eyes around in alarm. The reason why the boy's father was keeping his temper was probably because of the boy. If he were to revoke his agreement to the deal, everything would be ruined. Full body transplant? Back in the days, when the technology wasn't this advanced, it meant a transplant operation involving the body from the neck down. But in the present day, the term now referred to the transplant of the brain and spinal cord. The use of a minor's body for full body transplant was only allowed after more than a month of being declared brain dead. Not only that, the operation was only legal when taking place in a registered medical institution, for a recipient who had gone through a proper application procedure, after passing a compatibility test, and many other proceedings. Therefore, it was illegal to use a healthy boy's body for a transplant. What was interesting was that despite the fact that it was already illegal, the chairman of the Heisen group specifically demanded the consent of the body donor himself. He said that this was his ethical principle and that the reason why he was breaking the law was that the law was wrong. His father, who wanted to roar in anger but couldn't, found it difficult to restrain his language. He must have filtered his words 1,000 times by now. It was a hard process for a person who was easily swayed by his emotions. So, my son. You know you can't renege on your decision now, right? Well. If you act irresponsibly and revoke your agreement, the whole family will be in big trouble. Irresponsible. The boy slowly counted numbers in his mind. It was a habit he had acquired to swallow his anger. The feeling of a sharp stone rolling around inside his heart. This was already the third time happening. It happened too many times. It can't be like this, the boy thought. The boy closed his eyes and tried to think of a snowy hill so that the loneliness could take over his anger. After his anger subsided, the boy shook his head. Don't worry. With that being said, the boy focused on finishing his meal. If he could, he would have run upstairs to his sister. But he knew that the medical team wouldn't let him. Eating his meal was also part of the rules he had to abide by. The boy decided to change his perspective. The food he was eating was made by Gul. It wasn't often that he could enjoy her homemade food. The boy emptied the bowl clean. But it wasn't until he finished brushing his teeth and taking a shower, which was also a rule specified in the contract, that he was allowed to go upstairs to his sister's room. Gul was crying in her room. Perrin, with tears welling up in his eyes, asked his sister if she was okay. Kids at that age tended to cry along with others. Before the boy could say anything, Gul dragged Perrin to her bosom. Don't worry. I was just sick, that's all. I'm all better now. Really? You're not sick anymore? Yes, really. Thank God, Perrin let out a cute laugh. There were 2 beds in Gul's room. Apparently, Perrin liked to sleep there with her sister. Of course, Perrin also had a room of his own. Although their down payment was running out, their mother decided to buy it anyway, for they would receive the rest of the money soon. For the boy who was used to living a poor life, his mother's lavish expenditure was a bit worrisome. But he couldn't tell his mother. He was afraid to spoil the mood. Not long after, Perrin began to nod off in his sister's arms. Gul gently patted Perrin's head and tucked him into his bed. Sitting at the edge of her bed, Gul finally decided to look into the boy's eyes. This was the first time today. But soon, tears poured down from her eyes. The boy was greatly startled at the sudden situation. Nuna, what's wrong? The boy sat next to her and reached out to her cheeks to wipe her tears, but Gil grabbed his hand and began to weep even more sadly. Her trembling shoulder helplessly leaned over to the boy's chest. Without any words, the boy hugged her. Droplets of tears fell onto the bed. Only then was the boy able to feel his heart filling up with something that he lacked. Something that he had sought from other people, but hadn't been able to obtain. Human warmth. Gil spoke with voice shaky, "I don't know how I'm gonna live without you. It's okay. We can still talk by phone. And we can meet in that other world if you ever come to the Ossuary." Gil answered him with a hug. The two of them hugged until they were interrupted by a sudden knock on the door. "It's almost your bedtime. Come on out," spoke one of the medical staff in a perfunctory tone. The pointy stones started rolling again inside the boy's heart. Hi. This is Novel Admire. Thanks for the visit. Chapter 6. The San Miguel Flower Factory was an old-looking wooden building, large enough to fit a dozen houses inside. There was a railway track passing right by it, which provided a clear view of its north and south side. When the soldiers announced they'd pick someone to stand guard at the crossing, the participants who had already somewhat filled their bags volunteered themselves. They thought it'd be relatively safer to stand guard in an open space than to conduct the search inside a closed building. A healthy college-aged young man and a fat-bellied middle-aged man were chosen for the job. Corporal Elliot led the rest of the team to the factory's east side. There were a total of 4 entrances. One led to the office, as it was written on a sign, and the 3 others were for loading cargo. At the far end of the factory, there was a semi-trailer parked just right outside one of the entrances. Jael tried to open the driver's seat door, but as expected, it was locked. All the entrances to the factory had been left wide open. Due to the lack of light inside, every entrance resembled a dark hole, but none of the participants had been provided with lanterns. It was such an essential item, but they had somehow overlooked it during the planning phase. Since they had found the keys for the fire truck inside of the fire station, the keys for this truck might have also been left behind. Just as Jael was thinking of entering the office, Private Guilherme called him from behind. "Don't tell me you're planning on going inside alone again, are you? Should I go in with you?" "No, we need the instructor outside. Just lend me your flashlight." "Who?" Guilherme couldn't help but be astonished at the boy's guts. He then unclipped an angle-head flashlight from his bulletproof vest and handed it to the boy. Although the U.S. military had taken refugees as volunteers to reduce their soldiers' casualties, that didn't mean they were okay with needlessly sacrificing refugees. However, with the exception of the boy, the participants were even more passive than they had originally expected, so the soldiers were eager to see the boy in action. Jael walked towards the entrance to the office with his rifle on his back and holding his machete. As soon as he entered, he saw a staircase wide enough for just one person. Except for a few steps that were right in front of him, everything else was covered in darkness. It was a very unsettling scene. Just like he did at the fire station, the boy knocked on the wall with the machete so that if there were any mutants inside, they'd hear the sound and creep out. After hitting the wall a few times, he heard a mutant walking towards the staircase. Judging from the non-overlapping footsteps, it seemed there was only one mutant on its way. Jael carefully climbed up the stairs without turning on his flashlight. He was going to rely solely on the smell and sounds he could sense. Amid the pitch darkness where seeing was impossible, 2 creaking sounds created a dissonant noise. A monotonous, grim noise played in the background. Jael wasn't scared, but his heart was beating fast. His senses were telling him so. It was an artificially created feeling regulated by the control eye. Notifications of new viewers' messages flickered crazily in his periphery. The mutants reeked of putrefying flesh. According to the information, once the pathogen tries to take over the mutant's body, it causes an immune system malfunction, making its skin fester, and eventually rot. Not only that, but the infection also affects the respiratory system, producing a very coarse and sharp sound upon breathing. Before he knew it, the unpleasant smell and sound were already right beside him. Jael boldly stretched out the hand that wasn't holding the knife, grabbing onto something. Scree! A horrible shriek scratched the boy's eardrum. Jael ducked and lifted the mutant's lower body in one swift motion. The sound of the mutant's heavy breathing passed right by his ear before it fell behind his back. Thump. The boy presumed the viewers who kept the sensory synchronization on must have felt thrilled with that experience. It was something he had done intentionally. The boy turned on the flashlight. The mutant that was struggling on the floor frowned with a shriek. Though mutated, its body was still that of a human's. It would take time for its eyes to adjust to the sudden brightness. But the boy didn't allow that to happen and immediately thrust his machete into its open mouth. The mutant reflexively bit the blade, but couldn't get the machete out of its mouth. The boy then put more weight on the machete. Crunch! Twisting the blade, the boy felt the crushing of its brain stemming from the tip of his knife. The mutant convulsed on the ground, but its struggle gradually decreased until it completely stopped. Finally, the mutant's eyes rolled back and died while staring at the boy. The boy, however, remained unfazed. The boy grabbed the mutant by its leg and dragged it down the stairs and out of the building. When he came out, the people that were standing guard outside pointed their guns at him, but soon lowered them after noticing it was the boy. Tossing the corpse by the entrance, the boy went up the stairs once again. He entered the office and flipped the switch, but the lights didn't turn on, so the boy started searching the office relying only on his flashlight. To his surprise, the first thing he found was an old pistol lying carelessly in an easily accessible drawer. There were also 2 small cartons of 50-round bullets, marked 45 ACP-FMJ, and a spare magazine along with the gun. He didn't know whether it was because he was in the US or because it was a game. Aside from the gun and ammo, he also found the keys for both the car and the silo. There was also a humidor filled with cigars, which he took with him to give it to the soldiers in case they liked it. When he came down the stairs, Private Guilherme approached him. "Did you get bitten anywhere?" he asked, with a stuffy-sounding voice coming through the gas mask. The boy shook his head and spread his arms sideways. After giving him a thorough examination, the private raised his hand and gave a thumbs up. A short distance away, Corporal Elliot nodded. "Guilherme, do you smoke?" "Yeah, why do you?" "Wait, hold on, are those Cohiba Robusto you're holding?" "Split them with Elliot." The boy handed over the box to the private who was jumping with joy. Cohiba Robusto was one of the finest handmade Cuban cigars which used to cost over $15 a stick. Any heavy smoker would be pleased if they received a box full of such fine cigars. "I found the key to the trailer. Mind if I check it out?" The boy asked for permission even though it was a trivial thing. The 2 soldiers looked at each other. The corporal then gave him a nod as an answer. The boy pushed the key into the keyhole of the semi-trailer and the door opened without any problem. After confirming that the door was fine, it was now time to see if the engine worked. Without further delay, the boy climbed up to the driver's seat, inserted the key into the ignition hole and twisted it. The car started with a loud splutter, which made the people around noticeably more nervous. Thankfully, the trailer had some oil left in the tank. The boy decided to move the trailer to the loading dock. Thanks to his previous runs, it wasn't hard for him to drive even without the driving skill. Of course, he'd be able to drive more skillfully if he had it, but that wasn't an urgent matter. The boy went back into the building, this time through another entrance. Thanks to the sunlight shining through the cracks on the tin roof, the inside wasn't completely dark, unlike the office. But there were still places here and there covered in shadows. It wouldn't be strange if there was something hiding under those places. The other participants who had come into the building with him were so scared that they could hardly move a step forward. Once again, to check if there were any mutants, the boy banged on a metal container sitting next to him. But no matter how long he waited, nothing came out. Jai Eel then started walking around, checking every corner with his flashlight, but he couldn't find any mutants. This is unusual, the boy thought. Still, he didn't let his guard down. There could be mutants that had lost their hearing lurking under the shadows. Look what we have here! Elliot exclaimed at the mountain of wheat and cornflour. If they could bring this back to the camp, they wouldn't have to worry about food for months. It would have to go through a sanitary inspection, but the process was only in name. Even the gas masks they were wearing were only for the sake of appearances. If they were really worried about getting infected, they should have worn a full bodysuit instead of just a mask. It was proof that things were going badly in the western part of the U.S. Unlike Corporal Elliot, what Jai Eel was paying attention to was not the sacks of flour. Instead, he was looking at several sacks of seeds stacked up in a corner. He was thinking he could take those seeds to cultivate them, but there was a trap here. The seeds from certain companies would not germinate after the first harvest. These seeds were called Terminator seeds. They were genetically modified seeds created to produce plants whose own seeds were sterile so that farmers would have to repurchase their product instead of being able to replant their own yield. Because of this, one of Jai Eel's previous runs had ended up with a bad ending. There was even an achievement for it. Achievement: no, my crops are eunuchs. It was a catastrophe for the boy who had built a fairly stable community. The second year's harvest had been close to zero. The members of the community blamed their leader, Jai Eel, and the community soon collapsed due to the shortage of food. The boy was, of course, killed in the process. The boy then realized that he might have to explain this to his viewers. He hesitantly called up the viewer's messages log. Whenever he did this, the world didn't seem realistic anymore, and his immersion was interrupted. The boy paused the game for a moment and activated the teletype function. All his thoughts were instantly converted into letters. Han Jai Eel, let me explain something for those of you who are new to the days after apocalypse. The reason I'm not taking those seeds with us is that they are Terminator seeds. The Terminator seeds are genetically modified to produce a high yield, but also to produce nothing in the following year. I've tried to farm them before without knowing this, and as you can see, I've failed miserably. So, if you want to farm crops in this game, you have to either stick with the generic products like the logo-free sacks that I'm looking at right now or just get a ton of Terminator seed bags and treat them like consumables. If you want to get the achievement "No, my crops are eunuchs," you can try getting the bad ending. But it only gives you a buff that raises the crop's resistance to blights and droughts, so I don't think it's worth the effort. Viewers' responses popped up almost immediately. Legend 12, they get so realistic in these kinds of details. Lamau, _crocodile, crops are eunuchs XD. Who named that achievement? Updog, I know this too. It's a trick that the famous seed companies use to squeeze the farmers in developing countries dry. Especially Monxxto, those fuckers are the worst. They took the patent to produce red hot peppers and spinach seeds, and there are still decades left before the patent expires. The Korean spinach you guys are eating is all American OEM products. Oh, by the way, Your Honor, it was my cat that wrote this comment. Van.com, he's reading the comments now, right? Dude, what you did with that zombie back in the stairs, it was awesome. I almost wet my pants when you did that. XD. Here, take my money. Van.com donated 10 stars. Soup for sluts, no one asked you updog, and why don't you stfu asshole? Snowy Fox, guys, don't fight in the chat. Snowy Fox donated 10 stars. Anko, don't stop them. Just let them fight. The flooding messages quickly replaced the previous ones, making it hard to read them one by one. The boy then counted the amount of virtual currency, stars, that he had collected so far. He had a few tens of thousands of won. For some reason, his heart became heavier. Jai Eel closed the message log and resumed the game. The world came back to life once more. When the boy looked around, Corporal Elliot was talking to his radio, telling the main force to bring the truck to the flour factory. The rest of the team was loading the food on the semi-trailer parked at the loading dock under Private Guilherme's order. When the boy walked up to help them load the food, Private Guilherme approached him and patted his shoulder. "Just leave the rest to the others and take some rest, brave boy. You've already done enough today, don't you think?" said Guilherme with a wink. "All right." The boy nodded. Not much later, distant noises of vehicles could be heard. Outside, there were 4 military cargo trucks. The master sergeant, the one who had been in charge of the participants' body inspection back at the camp, came along as the vehicle commander. His name was Pierce. He was greatly pleased with the mountain of sacks that were more than enough to fill up the truck. "We can finally put the KPs back to work." However, the elated mood only lasted until they heard a strange rumble coming from the northern exit. But they couldn't get a clear view of the outside through the northern exit due to the grain silos and water tower obstructing the view. "What's that sound?" "Check what it is," ordered Pierce. At the instruction, Corporal Elliot radioed the volunteers who were standing guard at the crossing and asked them if they could see anything from the north. But the sign of disaster quickly became apparent from the sound rather than the sight. The rumbling noise was the sound of a train running on the railroad. Knowing that trains weren't supposed to be operating, the soldiers were disconcerted at the situation. Even more dumbfounding, however, was that the train was running straight towards some unattended vehicles left in the middle of the tracks without signs of speeding down. Receiving the report through the radio, the corporal's face turned pale immediately. "Mother of..." The corporal turned around and started running outside as he shouted at the people inside the factory. "Everyone, get out!" And with that shout, the factory was filled with screams in no time. Suddenly, a loud crashing noise was heard from outside. The train must have hit an abandoned car on the railroad. And almost immediately, a giant flaming lump of steel crashed into the factory. Wrecking through the northern wall, it rolled further into the building, destroying the machinery and beams of the building. The train stopped thanks to the destroyed piles of wood, but the building began to collapse. Jael barely managed to escape the factory, however, a large number of people ended up buried under the debris. "Get rid of the wreckage. We can still save the people inside." Covered in dust, Master Sergeant Pierce raised his voice. Due to the building being a single-story wooden building, there was a good chance that the people buried under the wreckage were still alive. "Sir, look over there!" one of the soldiers shouted at Pierce. In the direction he pointed were the train wagons turned upside down and in zigzag. From the doors and windows, things that resembled human beings began to crawl out. Those that had been flung out of the train from the collision also rose to their feet staggeringly. "Ra'org! Shit! We got mutants here!" It wasn't just one or two. As if the whole train was packed with those creatures, they kept pouring out of the train like maggots crawling out of a rotten corpse. Some of the fairly intact mutants were even running fast. "Kill them all!" the corporal exclaimed. But the majority of the participants had already fled far away. There were only a few people left to face the mutants. The silenced gunshots poured out of their guns. They didn't try to save bullets. They just fired madly at the mutants. One that tried to get over the trailer got shot almost instantly. Its head exploded, its eyes burst, and blood came spraying out from its chest. Some of the mutants rushed towards the boy. Because the mutants didn't stop even after being shot, Jael aimed his rapid-fire rifle at their legs and pulled the trigger. It would be good if he struck their thighs, and even better if he could get their knees or shin bones. Keek! The fallen ones struggled to get back up. The boy walked forward as he reloaded his magazine and stomped on their necks with his military boots. He then tightly gripped his gun and struck the jaw of the mutant in front of him. With the help of his skill, the mutant's jaw completely crushed, its body falling backward. Another mutant that had been running right behind it tripped over the falling mutant. After giving them a good kick, Jael went back to firing his gun, Grenades! Take cover! One of the soldiers shouted urgently. The boy looked behind and there were already several grenades flying his way. The boy hurriedly ran back and threw himself on the floor. Boom! Kaboom! Compared to the deafening noise the grenades created, the explosions themselves were rather small, producing only a few flashes and a bit of smoke. But the boy knew that a hand grenade didn't rely on the explosion to kill. It was a weapon that killed people by tearing them apart with the debris scattered by the blast. Anyone within a radius of 30 meters would be instantly killed. It was something he had learned through experience. The mutants flew out like trees in a typhoon. The entire road turned into a bloodbath in the blink of an eye. Thankfully, the boy managed to get out of the grenade's range. While the grenades were still exploding, a mutant with a ragged body came crawling towards the boy. In his lying position, the boy laid his rifle on his stomach and pulled the trigger. Due to his unstable posture and poor aim, the bullet didn't hit its head but his shoulder. The second shot, however, went right through its eyeball, killing it instantly. But when the boy lowered his guard, a new mutant appeared from behind the dead one. He must have missed it because it was hidden from his view. The new mutant was already so close to him. The boy quickly pulled the trigger, but nothing came out of the gun. He couldn't have used up all the bullets. It seemed like the round had jammed the gun. The boy rolled to the side and swiftly pulled at the bayonet from the rifle, sticking the bayonet into the top of the mutant's head. Its rotten blood splattered onto his face. The moment when he felt the crushing of its skull through his fingertips, an incredible chill ran down his spine, giving him an indescribable pleasure. He felt satisfaction and fulfillment, but also a hint of guilt and sorrow. After the explosions, the place sank into silence. The boy regained his footing while the mutants were still moving their tattered limbs. Before being bombarded by the grenades, the mutants, though they seemed sick or crazy, still resembled humans, but now they looked more like monsters. There was one with its guts spilling out, one walking with a broken leg, another one with its bones poking through its skin, and so on. But in the boy's eyes, they were nothing more than a bunch of experience points. Jael grabbed his machete and slowly walked up to the staggering mutants. The gunshots fired by the other soldiers were starting to sound like distant echoes. It has nothing to do with me. With that thought in mind, the boy drew a horizontal line with his machete on the mutant in front of him. Its head fell before its body collapsed on the ground. The boy then hacked at another mutant that was creeping on the ground. He was so focused that the only thing he could hear was his own breathing. Another mutant approached him and a diagonally slashed machete tore apart its flesh from its temple down to its cheek on the other side. The impact dislocated its jaw and revealed its throat. Without hesitation, the boy shoved his machete into its throat and pulled it out by kicking its body away. When the boy came back to his senses, he was standing alone among hundreds of the mutants' corpses. He took a look around. Only the US soldiers were there watching him, their faces pale. Several notifications informing him about the change in the soldiers' favor were flickering in the corner of his view. Some had increased, but some had also decreased. Jael put away his knife and checked his rifle. When he pulled back the bolt and gave it a few shakes, the bullet that had been jamming the gun popped out and fell onto the asphalt. Don't just stand around gawking. We got people to save. Come on, get to work. Ramirez, you guys stand on guard. Master Sergeant Pierce raised his voice. New vehicles arrived one after another. They had come to provide backup after being notified of an engagement. The arrival was quick, but due to the use of hand grenades, the battle had ended even faster, making the backup meaningless. Chapter 7. When the player uses the time acceleration function, or when a quest requires a time skip, a loading screen may appear during the time needed for a scenario computation. The loading screen provides a variety of information, such as pieces of advice from the control eye, descriptions of several in-game functions, hints to help one understand the situation, and advertisements for DLCs and add-ons. This information is referred to as the intermission in days after apocalypse. Intermission, the journal, time acceleration, and virtual personality. The journal is a system that helps the player keep track of in-game events. Any past events, including those that have been skipped with the time acceleration function, can be accessed through the journal and can be reproduced and re-experienced through the sensory synchronization function. The quality of the journal may differ depending on the skills the player has access to. Time acceleration allows the player to skip the waiting time before the beginning of certain quests, or transportation time, etc. If activated, the system will create a virtual personality to stand in for the player during the accelerated time. All the events occur during that time will be recorded in the journal. If the result is unsatisfactory, the player has the option to rewind the accelerated time once and personally go through the corresponding event. Once rewound, the time acceleration function will be disabled for a certain duration. The virtual personality responsible for recording the journal learns from the behavioral patterns of the player by studying the data collected in previous runs and throughout the game. Therefore, the virtual personality's resemblance to the player will improve the more they play. Journal, page 29, Camp Roberts. The first procurement mission ended in half success. We did manage to secure food, fuel, and winter supplies, but we suffered too many casualties. And worst of all is that, after the mission, the U.S. military lost trust in the refugees. There were several events that led to this result. One of them was the internal conflict between the participants. From what I heard, a bloody fight broke between the participants that were deployed to the church. If it wasn't obvious enough already, the problem occurred when everyone got together to distribute the supplies they had found. When the one who had taken the lead in killing the mutants tried to take a bigger portion of the supplies, the others stabbed him in the back of his head and disguised the murder as the mutants' doing. The tragedy came to light when the soldiers heard the perpetrators quarreling in front of the corpse and examined the wounds. There were also some refugees who tried to smuggle guns into the camp after returning from the mission. The U.S. military would have to worry about an armed protest if they let the refugees carry guns, so the soldiers conducted a thorough body search before returning to the camp. And as expected, some of them had tried to hide small pistols under their garments. Once caught, they begged the soldiers with the excuse of needing something to protect themselves with. Whether their pleas were true or not, they tried to hide a gun from the soldiers, so the soldiers' distrust grew even bigger. And what contributed the most to the soldiers' distrust was the collapse of the flour factory. Although nobody was to blame for the sudden appearance of the train and its derailment, the problem was that most of the participants had fled without fighting the mutants when there were people under the debris that needed rescue. Fortunately, the soldiers who got caught in this accident got away with just some injuries that required, at most, 4 weeks of medical treatment. However, that was still enough to generate hatred towards the refugees. Because of all these incidents, the soldiers refused to carry out a new procurement mission, as they couldn't trust the refugees anymore. At least, they would need a new plan, and the camp's higher-ups seemed to have agreed on that. Not long after, I was called to Lieutenant Capstone's office. He said that some of the soldiers had advised him to be wary of me, but he also said that I didn't have to worry because Master Sergeant Pierce stuck up for me. Don't listen to those cowards, Commander. What's important is that this little guy stayed and fought until the end, and I insist that we can trust him. And then, I was offered to become a volunteer soldier. He listed all the benefits I'd have, including quarters, uniforms, equipment, and so on. Although I wouldn't be allowed to carry a gun, it was still a tempting offer. Right after leaving the office, one of the soldiers approached me, telling me that Corporal Elliott wanted to see me. The headquarters are agonizing over the staffing problem right now. There's a possibility that they'll pick out some relatively reliable refugees and enlist them in the army, and I think that your volunteer position is a step towards that. If that happens, you're gonna be called Private Joe.L, did I get it right? Ha ha. That's all well and good, but do you really think that's gonna happen? I'm not even a US citizen. Oh, I'm dead sure about that. You know, there's no country other than the US that takes this many immigrants for their national army. I mean, look at Galherm, he also joined the army for the US citizenship. Right now, the US government is in a state of emergency, and they have issued a mobilization order. Many corporals, including myself, are being asked to take a field promotion. And if that happens, they'll need more soldiers. Where do you think they'll recruit soldiers from, in this isolated camp? Besides, I think you'd make a great soldier. But wouldn't my age be a problem? We're on the brink of extinction, my friend. It was a composed but grave answer. After telling him that I'd consider the offer, I walked out of the aid station. When I came back to my tent, it was in a complete mess. It looked like someone had ransacked the tent. They must have been after my ration stamps. The people who went to San Miguel all received extra ration stamps as promised. Although they didn't divulge how many stamps we each got, they must be thinking that I got more than the other participants. A lot of them were jealous of me. They claimed that they should be all equally rewarded for taking the risk, regardless of contribution. I've been carrying my stamps in my pocket. Still, I don't think I'll be able to sleep at night. For the sake of safety, it might be better to take the offer. I advise, LVL6 Insight, you have been offered a volunteering position for the outstanding performance on your procurement mission. If you accept, your freedom of action will be reduced as you will be forced to join any future mission. Also, the factions will more frequently attempt to recruit you. If you reject, the chance of encountering hostile random events will increase, and you may be assassinated if you do not meet the level requirement for skills such as survival instinct. Player's choice, accept the offer. I made up my mind and went to see Lieutenant Robert Capstone straight away. It wasn't safe to leave my safety to someone else. Lieutenant welcomed my decision and summoned Master Sergeant Pierce to have him appoint me a room. The next morning, the battalion commander gathered the refugees and made me stand on a platform next to him. He praised my brave actions during the mission and announced my enlistment in the US military. I could see his intentions for making it into a big deal. Journal, page 30, Camp Roberts. I kept waking up in the middle of the night. Subconsciously, I might have felt uncomfortable sharing quarters with strangers. According to the fellow soldiers sharing the room with me, the facilities in Camp Roberts were quite old compared to other military bases because it used to be a boot camp used for training recruits. In the newer barracks, each person only gets one, or at most two roommates, and each room has a separate bathroom and shower. After becoming an unofficial volunteer soldier, all the ration stamps I've received up till now have become useless, since I now have access to the cafeteria, which the soldiers called Fak or Chow Hall. The meal they served me at the cafeteria was completely different from the rations they fed refugees in both quantity and quality. Even though this wasn't good enough to satisfy the US soldiers, I enjoyed it. Only, the dishes were a bit too salty and greasy for me, probably because of the cheese that was used in most of today's dishes. They must have brought a lot of cheese from San Miguel. I was assigned 2 tasks as a volunteer soldier. One was, obviously, the daily military training, and the other one was patrolling Korean refugee zones. Originally, the U.S. military, in cooperation with the San Francisco police officers, was in charge of maintaining security. But apparently, the inability to understand the language posed a problem for them. So, I'm guessing that's probably the reason they want me, someone who speaks the same language, to keep tabs on the Korean refugee camps. Not just that, they also asked me to find some trustworthy people to recruit as soldiers. I guess what Elliot said was true. After receiving my uniform from the quartermaster, Lieutenant Capstone came to see me and told me to always wear the bulletproof vest. He was worried that other refugees might see me as an eyesore and try to harm me. He said that although bulletproof clothing was not as efficient as a stab vest in defending against stabs, it would still be enough to block a shiv or any sharp object available to the refugees. When I thanked him for his concern, he patted me on my shoulder. He was indeed a good person. Of course, not everyone in the military was as good as Lieutenant Capstone. There was an officer, Captain Magoth, who asked me my affiliation when he saw me wearing the uniform. When I told him that I had been commissioned as a volunteer soldier by the orders of the commander, he creased his brows. "Ha! You think you can just fit in here by wearing that uniform, banana?" His words were unexpectedly sharp. Racial discrimination was supposed to be a strong taboo amongst the soldiers, but it looks like the current situation has made a lot of them overlook this kind of verbal violence. The epidemic not only kills what's alive but also revives what's dead. Many dead things. What I can't understand is what good will it do for him? It's not like there aren't many non-white soldiers here. If he keeps acting like that, he'll have to worry about getting shot one day. When I went to the refugee camp, I noticed the people whom I used to think as friends had changed their attitude towards me. I could at least understand if they tried to flatter me or act awkward around me, but I had no idea why they would avoid me all of a sudden. I went up to them and asked them why, but what I got was straight up anger. They called me a traitor. They disparaged me, saying that I'm cunning and despicable. That I buttered up to those dirty soldiers' asses, trying to eat the crumbs off of their table, and that now, I was acting like one of them. They said I deserved these insults since I didn't join the Korean faction to help the other Koreans. I stood speechless when they told me to go cry and tell the officers about this. I feel like I've suddenly become an outsider who doesn't belong anywhere. Past 2, the night before the deal, Goheng, High Group's chairman, Goguntial tapped on an empty glass with his fingertips. He was badly craving for a drink. Since the betrayal of the woman he loved, he had been having a hard time falling asleep without the help of alcohol. He had been feeling tired lately, the reason being the medical staff's orders for him to stay away from alcohol before the deal. Suddenly, a knock came from the door, but the chairman ignored it. "Father, it's me." It was the voice of his one and only daughter. A surge of anger rushed over him. He didn't want to see her face, so he exclaimed indifferently, "I know. Fuck off." His daughter, Goheng, didn't listen to him. Seeing the door open, the chairman threw the glass that he had been fiddling with. Seeing the flying glass coming at her, Ahing flinched. The glass passed right by her ear with a whiz and shattered behind her. The sound of shattering glass filled the empty corridor. Upon hearing this, some employees showed up with cleaning tools. They began to clean up the floor without giving her a single glance. It was nothing new anyway. The chairman said in a low voice, "Didn't I tell you to cover that disgusting face when you're in front of me?" "I'm sorry." Ahing dropped her head as she bit her lip. Her long and beautiful hair fell upon her face and covered half of it. But her hair couldn't obscure her natural beauty. The chairman clenched his teeth. Dirty vixen, he thought. The woman he once loved also had an appearance that didn't match her age. He didn't like the look of his daughter's face because she reminded him too much of her mother. But he tried to keep his anger under control. Out of 5 kids whom the fucking whore gave birth to, she was the only one who actually carried his blood. "What do you want?" "I have something to ask of you." "What is it?" Ahing hesitated for a moment, but she didn't keep her father waiting for long. "Could you please cancel the deal?" "Why?" "For God's sake, why?" The chairman fumed at his daughter. "You ungrateful cunt. Your father is trying to start a new life with a new body, and you dare try to stop that?" "Oh, I get it. It's because you can take over my business only when I'm lying in my coffin. That's what you want, isn't it?" "No. That's not what I'm saying." "Then speak with your goddamn mouth. I'm saying, you don't have to take away someone else's body. There are other choices, like producing a clone and use that as your body. Why do you have to take another person's body and ruin their life, not to mention breaking the law?" The chairman stared at his daughter for a moment, then continued with a mocking voice, Ha! I was a fool to think I could trust you with the management. Why? Did you, all of a sudden, feel pity for that little boy? Ahing couldn't deny it. She did feel a lot of sympathy. It was her father who had ordered her to monitor the product management process. She had to watch the boy's every single movement. But in the process, Ahing couldn't help but start feeling sorry for the boy. He was willing to sacrifice himself so that his family could live a comfortable life. The chairman shouted at his daughter. And what did you say? Use a clone? That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Cloning is not a well-tested technology. That body has to get pickled in a growth accelerator for a whole year until it becomes appropriate for transplant. And you don't even know what kind of problem might arise in the future, but what you're doing is against the law. It's wrong, Father. You think I'm wrong? What's wrong is the law. It's contaminated with those communists' ideas. South Korea is a free nation. Whatever one does should be entirely up to themselves. The boy agreed to this deal, and so did his parents. We're not even causing any harm to anyone, what's all the fuss about? Besides, you think that that lazy family will thank us for canceling the deal? Ha, wake up. The chairman laughed at his daughter and caught his breath before speaking again. I'm not a philanthropist. If the deal is broken, I'm going to get back what they took from me by any means possible. Ahing dropped her head even lower. Canceling the deal would put the family in a difficult situation. The boy's parents, whose love for their children was shallow, just like her father's, had already spent much of the money they received as a down payment, purchasing useless stuff like 2 pricey foreign cars. Even the houses they currently reside in had been given to them in accordance with the contract. That was why she identified with the boy. She wanted to tell him that he didn't have to sacrifice himself for his parents. And that his life should be his own. But in the end, she couldn't do anything for him. Let me tell you something, because I don't want my daughter to go anywhere jabbering about nonsense and make me look like a fool. The chairman then continued, this was decades ago. Some prostitutes and people from women's organizations protested to legalize prostitution. Liberalism, that's what they shouted. They claimed that prostitution had to be protected by the law, for it too should be considered as exercising their right of self-determination. That's right, and I agree. They weren't wrong. It's not like having sex with someone would trouble others. They also had some practical reasons for it. One of them was a livelihood problem. For those women who had to rely on prostitution to make a living due to their lack of ability, they would end up in the gutter if they couldn't sell their bodies. The chairman showed barely any sign of uneasiness when talking about prostitution in front of his daughter. She knew it was to insult her because his hatred towards her had often been expressed in this kind of way. So Ahing only listened to her father without saying anything. On the other hand, the women's organizations of this country of the same area vehemently opposed the legislation of prostitution because they believed it violated women's rights and impaired their dignity. Do not sexually objectify women, was what they said. Well, okay, I admit it was for a good cause. But the question is, what about their jobs? Did they offer any alternatives to prostitutes who would lose their jobs by prohibiting prostitution? Well, they did get to take an occupational training course, but as always, it was only a rough and ready measure. But that was enough for women's groups. They didn't care about the results. Why? Because the reason why they stepped up for this matter was not for the prostitutes, but themselves all along. Because they couldn't stand the fact that there are women who are working as sex workers living in the same country. They didn't care if they ended up starving to death. Ahing understood what her father was trying to say. She could even guess what he would say next. And she could refute it too. Prostitutes losing their job after the prohibition was not an obvious but an inevitable result. And if it was inevitable, then what would have been right was to plan for long-term improvement, not to neglect them. Her father himself said it was for a good cause. However, Ahing didn't try to refute her father. Her father was the kind of man that thought of his life as the one and only correct path in life. Anything she said now, whether it was true or not, would only make him even more furious. And sure enough, the chairman's next remark was just as what she had expected. And this is what those empty-headed bitches probably had in their mind. Dear prostitutes, we don't care what you do for a living, but selling sex hurts our pride, so could you please stop? Oh, you have nothing you can do? I'm sorry, but that's none of our business. You'll die if you can't do this job? Oh, please do. I don't even understand why you'd want to live after debasing all women's dignity. The chairman sprang up from his seat and made an unsightly imitation of a female voice. It was amazing considering that he was in his 70s. Because of this personality, even the senior members of the group were reluctant to speak with the chairman. If they ruffled his feathers even just a little bit, he would often become completely vicious. Only a fool makes such a demand without offering any realistic alternative. Did you feel sorry for that boy? But if you cancel this deal, if you satiate what petty conscience you have, will he be thankful to you? Will he console himself with the fact that he at least saved his body when he will then have to live from hand to mouth? Is that what you think? Ha ha. Please stop. Stop? Don't you remember that it was you who started all this? The chairman shouted as he slammed his hands on the table. My youth. Half of my life that bitch stole from me. Now, I am just a step away from getting it back, but her daughter is here to take that away from me once again. Oh, what am I going to do? I'm sorry, father. So please, stop. And that was how their conversation ended. It had always been like that and it wouldn't change until the day he dies. All parents who raise their children without love deserve to be cursed. Ahing tried to erase it from her mind. It was the last effort she could make to avoid hurting herself. HMPH. The chairman plumped down in his seat and rested his chin on his hand. Pathetic. I don't know who you took after to grow up to be this pathetic. I'm starting to doubt if you are really my daughter. Get out. We'll talk about your performance after I see the final product. Have a good night. I will, all thanks to you. The chairman shooed her away as if he was fanning a fly away. Feeling her mind filled with a sense of defeat, self-depreciation, and humiliation, Ahing left her father's room. She felt so exhausted when seeing the corridor. It was long, dark, and empty. The mansion was too huge for just the two of them to live in. Ahing walked through the corridor with faltering steps. Chapter 8. While the boy was pondering which story branch to follow, he noticed a quest marker approaching him on its own. It's about time, the boy thought. Directly below the quest marker, a Korean man of short stature was walking towards him. Behind his pair of glasses, his eyes were rolling from side to side, looking pretty nervous. Hello, may I call you Jae-il? Although the man was clearly older than Jae-il, he spoke using honorifics. Perhaps because of the scary rumors about the boy, or because of the intimidating air around him from having acquired new skills. The boy was about to tell him not to bother with honorifics, but on second thought, he decided not to. He knew that if people became comfortable with him, they would likely start taking him lightly. What is it? My name is Jang Eon-chul. I will just get straight to the point. Some people want to meet you. I'm afraid I can't tell you the details now, but I swear they won't do anything bad to you. There. Just people who need help. So please, could you spare me a few minutes? The boy accepted the man's request without much hesitation. And as soon as he nodded his head, a message notifying him of a mission log update appeared in front of him. Interactions between the player and the environment were evaluated in real time by the control eye, and among them, interactions with a clear causality were registered as missions, quests. It was one of the methods that the game employed to prevent the story from developing in a formulaic path. If the player lacked the adequate skills, the contents of quests would be often displayed with question marks. but the reason the boy was given a rough explanation of the contents was all thanks to the insight and detection skills he had. Organizations. It must be regarding the factions. This was just what he had been waiting for. The boy followed after the man. Yi Ranchel kept his head low on their way to their destination. It seemed like he was trying to avoid the other faction's eyes, but the boy thought it was a futile effort. They were in the refugee area. Despite not having a badge, Jai Il must be sticking out like a sore thumb dressed in his military uniform. And as anticipated, they already had a bunch of people tailing them. They must be the commissioners of the factions, Jai Il thought. Could you just give me a minute, please? Huh? Jai Il called Yi Ranchel to a stop and pointed at the people spying on them. All of you, you can just come out. Some of them tried to feign ignorance, but Jai Il's skills, survival instinct, combat sense, and crisis detection, were helping him capture even the slightest amount of hostility directed at him, making their charade useless. The boy pointed them out one by one and a total of 11 people gathered in front of Jai Il. With a snort, the stalkers tried to engage in a battle of nerves with the boy, turning the atmosphere more and more severe. Yi Ranchel's face turned completely pale. The Control Eyes Advice interface hovered in front of the boy's eyes, displaying keywords for a dialogue, recommended behavior, a combat proficiency assessment, and so on. As the men stood eyeball to eyeball with the boy, one of them spat out some words. Who do you think you're to order me around? And as if on cue, the others also started to voice out some remarks. You little brat, how dare you point your finger at your elders? All right, I'm here. But what are you gonna do, huh? But despite their unruly behavior, Jai Il knew there was one emotion that they were trying to hide from him. It was fear. He knew what kind of rumors were floating around the camp. They were mostly in regard to what transpired on the last procurement mission and what the boy had done there. And as all vicious rumors do, these also snowballed out of control. According to them, the boy was a serial killer, a heinous murderer, and an infamous psychopath. Now it was time to use those rumors to his advantage. The boy demanded in a brusque tone, "Stop following us around." As soon as Jai Il said it, he felt a tingling sensation running through his spine. He didn't need to hold back in his anger. That was the thing he most liked about living in a virtual reality. Who do you think? You've already said that. The boy immediately cut off the hollow threat. Or, to make it even, maybe I should follow you around and see how you like it. I have a good memory, by the way. I can remember all 11 of you without a problem. More viewers' messages came at a rapid pace. The people seemed to find the boy's actions very amusing. But the boy tried to ignore the notifications. He wanted to focus on the moment, to immerse himself in the situation. Is that a threat? If you are doing something that deserves it, then it could be a threat. You've seriously lost your mind, haven't you? Hey kid, you think that uniform makes you special? Let me tell you, this uniform is nothing. The boy once again cut them off mid-sentence, but they didn't get angry. They probably couldn't because they were scared of the boy. Though the situation would have been much different if the boy showed any sign of cowering or overreacting. This uniform is nothing, really, Jai Il repeated the same sentence as if emphasizing. Don't try to judge me by my appearance. Instead, I'd recommend you to judge me by what I have done, what I can do and what I will do. It was a sentence that the boy completed on his own without the help of the system, but rather, from the knowledge acquired from past experiences. A clot of emotions that had been lumped near his heart began to boil until it erupted through his mouth. I'm sick of other people trying to trample on me and making unreasonable demands. Nothing is as important as myself. Well, this is a world with nothing else. The boy began to walk towards the men as he grabbed the handle of the knife hanging on his belt. You guys probably haven't been following me for no reason, so I suppose you all know what I've done previously. But what you don't know is what I'm capable of doing to all of you. Do you want to see it for yourselves? Fucking hell, this kid is nuts. Jael and the men moved like two magnets of the same pole. When the boy took one step closer, the men took one step back. But they still glared at the boy with their eyes strained as if not wanting to make their fear evident. One of them tried to resist with a shaky voice. You know that I belong to the Korean patriotic community? You think I'd care about your faction when I don't care about my uniform? Ugh! If I kill everyone here, do you think your factions will send other people to avenge you? And what do you think the US military will think about a case involving 11 adults and a boy? You know, I'm very curious to know the answers to these questions. If you're curious too, why don't we find out right now? What a crazy thing he had just said. Even Jael himself was surprised at what had come out from his mouth. But the boy couldn't deny that it gave him an odd feeling of satisfaction. Jael realized that he had started smiling without noticing. But seeing his smile, the men grew even more terrified. Without uttering any more threats, they started backing away at a faster pace. And when they finally got far enough, they turned their backs and swiftly left the scene. Although it had only been a conversation, he saw that the control eye was evaluating his performance and converting it into experience points. The viewer's message icon was also flickering, notifying him of a star donation. Jael paused the game and opened the log. Chilikankarn, just got chills watching him act. Lol, how can he be so fluent without even using system keywords? I would have just killed myself if I had been in his shoes. Lol. Chilikankarn donated 20 stars. No memes for nickname. How is he so pro though? Is this really his first time broadcasting? I mean, he could be a famous BJ with a different name and face for all we know. Even his Tom level seems really high for a noob. Fuck ActiveX, who cares if he's pro or noob? He's fun to watch and that's all I care about. Hargei, yeah, who cares if it's a man or a woman? I don't care as long as it feels good. Kashmir, BJ is the wrong expression. Use streamer instead. Billy Harrington, fuck you. Kashmir donated 5 stars. Snowy Fox donated 20 stars. PPRPLZ, his gameplay isn't like those money-blinded old farts gringy acting. Galaxies 505 donated 1 star. After a moment of reluctance, the boy sent a short thank you message. Han Jael, thank you all for the stars. The boy pondered for a moment whether or not he should have said something longer, but soon dismissed the idea. Neither was this stream something he wanted to do, nor he know what to say instead. The boy right now was so much different from the boy who had just lashed out at the men. If possible, he wanted to end the stream right now. But he couldn't. He was desperate for stars. Hargei, I love how his reactions are brief. The other money-blinded streamers waste time by calling the donors' nicknames out loud one by one. The boy closed the message log with a sigh. Money-blinded streamers. He thought he wasn't much different from them either. All of a sudden, the boy felt his boiling heart growing very cold. The boy quickly resumed the game. Yeeronchel was standing frozen in place, seemingly overwhelmed. Several relationship update notifications popped up for Jael, the most notable one being the permanent upward revision to respect type favor. Amongst the 3 types of favors, friendship, love, and respect, respect type favor was what was needed to be recognized as a leader in a group. What was the most surprising for the boy was the +3 permanent revision gained from this event. Are you going to keep staring at me? Jael asked. Huh? Sorry. We should move. Either by mistake or on purpose, Yeeronchel spoke to him even more cautiously. Half fear and half admiration. The control eye displayed a piece of advice as if to support his thoughts. Psychological analysis, LVL6 insight, LVL6 detection. Yeeronchel admires you for what you have pulled off against the commissioners. 35% probability of containing errors, A higher level of insight or higher intelligence stat is necessary to reduce the probability of error. Following his lead, the boy arrived in front of a fairly large tent. To make sure it wasn't a trap, he first looked into the window located on the side of the tent. Under the dim light of a light bulb, there were people, all of them looking completely nervous and ill at ease. Chapter 9. Factions, 2, Camp Roberts. Something seems off. Inside the tent, there was near twice the maximum number of people it was meant to accommodate. As far as Jael knew, the camp shouldn't be running out of tents yet. The moment the boy questioned it in his mind, the control eye displayed a result as if to answer him. I advise, LVL6 Insight, judging by the fact that being part of a group makes it easier to protect oneself, they are likely a union of weak factions or a group of unaffiliated refugees. Oh, I see. It became quite self-explanatory when he thought about it a little bit more. A powerful faction would have occupied a whole area instead of cramming so many people into a single tent. Jael thus followed Yeonchul into the tent with more assurance. A tense atmosphere permeated the interior of the tent. Yeonchul clapped twice to draw the attention of the people inside and proceeded to introduce Jael to those who were at a loss. I believe most of you might already know him by the rumors, but let me introduce him for the sake of formality. This is Han Jael-sen. Please welcome him with a round of applause. The fact that Yeonchul was calling him, someone clearly younger, Mr., and how he asked for applause as if it was some sort of festival almost made the boy cringe. But everyone seemed too strained and weary to retort. And it was probably the best that Yeonchul could do right now. The boy glanced around the people sitting inside the tent. Almost all of them were refugees from minorities, women, children, and elderly people constituting the majority of them. Most of them looked skinny and ill-conditioned, giving off an impression of naivety and timidness. But at least they had some few grown men, so they'd be able to fight back if necessary. After receiving a most awkward round of applause, Jael was ushered to a chair right next to the stove. It was the best seat they had to offer, as the rest of the people were just sitting on folding chairs or the floor. I can see why you called me here. You do? Yeonchul asked back with a stiff expression. You want me to protect you, don't you? Yeonchul stayed silent at the boy's question. The silence itself was an implicit confirmation. This is just miserable. A growling voice came out from somewhere. It was the voice of an old man with grizzled hair. His face was plowed with deep furrows, a clear sign of his age. He finished the remaining words with a sigh. Miserable and embarrassing. To think that I would have to beg for help from someone of my grandchild's age, for my life. I'd rather die than continue living like this. Please, don't say that. Horrified by his words, Yeonchul tried to dissuade the old man with all his might. Something unbelievable happened just when we were on our way here. We were being followed by the different factions' commissioners, including the Korean Patriotic Association. But Jael somehow sensed them, called them out, and sent them packing with just a threat. The rumors were true. We can't just judge him by his age. Then, this time Yeonchul turned to the boy. Oh, I hope that didn't bother you, he said, in the same careful tone, referring to what the old man said. No, not really. He's right about me being young. He wouldn't have cared about it even if someone told him that in real life. Besides, he knew there were penalties imposed on underage characters. That held true even in the real world, why would it be any different here? There was no reason to even pretend to be angry. Yeonchul, agonizing whether the boy's words were true or not, carefully brought up what he really had in mind. I didn't mean to put pressure on you. The reason why I brought you here. What you said is true. We need help. The people here haven't joined any of the factions, and because of that, we've faced several difficulties. But as you can see, there are quite a lot of us, so we thought that if we had a good leader, we might be able to establish a faction to protect ourselves. So we've been looking for someone who could lead us. And that's why we invited you here. How many of you are there in this group? Around 80 people. Yi Ranchal answered in a feeble, timid voice. In hard times like these, useless people were the first to be abandoned. The boy presumed that compared to how big the group was, only a few of them were useful, resulting in Yi Ranchal's unassertive answer. Jai Il decided to change the question. How many of you can fight? But before Yi Ranchal could answer him, he added one more word, frankly. Jai Il kept his statement short and powerful. If he was going to accept the position as their leader, he had to make himself look imposing and compelling. If he were to take it easy on them, they would eventually start looking down on him. It was another lesson he learned the hard way. Point 17, Yi Ranchal answered with a deep sigh. That's too little. Jai Il's candor and his callous comment filled the room with a somber and chilling mood. It was as if winter had set in inside the tent. After a long awkward silence, Yi Ranchal articulated some words. I know, but despite having the option of joining any of the other factions, and getting better conditions than anything we could offer, you still chose to be alone. So, that's why I thought, maybe you don't like those crooks either. If I'm not wrong, please help us. I beg you. I'm afraid I'm too busy looking after myself. The boy pretended to be indisposed to accept their offer. That way, they wouldn't have grounds to add any ifs and buts later on. The factions that had current dominion over the camp relied too much on immoral acts. Even if the boy were to successfully become the leader of one of those factions, it was evident that their past actions would come to bite him in the future. That's why the boy had no intention of joining any of the existing factions, no matter how attractive their proposals seemed to be. However, there was also no guarantee that these people wouldn't become an impediment. The weak could also harbor malice. Even now, some of them were staring at him with cold eyes. They were so intense that he felt like he could hear their inner voices, saying that they were admitting him as the leader now, but that they would soon take his place. Some also had eyes full of greed, looking like they were only interested in having a leader to shift their burdens onto. To these people, the boy was nothing but a convenient scapegoat. They would pretend to put him on a pedestal when they were actually just taking advantage of him. The weak are not always on the side of justice. Rather, because they are weak, they often choose to do evil for survival. The weak who have been persecuted are prone to persecute the weaker. But that fact isn't proof that those people aren't good in nature either. Most of them do repent and regret what they've done when things change. A college-aged woman, though the boy wasn't sure of her age because of her disheveled appearance, raised her hand gallantly. We're not asking you to help us for free. If you can stop other factions' tyranny, we are willing to follow whatever you say. You can be a leader, you know. A hollow proposal. Her intention was black and white. She was trying to exploit him and was only looking at his young age, either on purpose or without being aware. Soon after, following the woman's example, the others also voiced their sentiments. To be honest, it is embarrassing to ask this of someone who isn't even a grown-up yet. A boy like you decided to go out there and earn yourself a living, but a grown-up like me is just sitting on his bum, helplessly waiting for others to help. It really hurts my pride. But I must admit, Jai Il, right? You're a much better person than a weak coward like me. I mean, who cares about age? There are so many adults here who can't even take care of themselves. It's been days since we had a proper meal. Even if we want to try and do something, there are a lot of people whose bodies won't function well. Jai Il said, please help us out. If you can help us get some decent meals for a few days, we swear we'll do anything for you. He's right. Besides, don't you think it'd be safer to have someone trustworthy watching your back when we get to go out on a mission again? My husband, although he's a little old, he used to serve in the Marine Corps. I've been starving for too long, I can't feed my baby properly. It's okay if I die, but I just want to save my child." When he heard this, Jael felt like something was hitting his heart. Something like a heavy pebble. Parents. To the boy, they were nothing but an old sore. Not only his parents but his whole family. Jael raised his hand to stop the people from talking and looked at the lady that was holding her baby in her bosom. Her lean and scrawny body and her haggard face made her look older. "Where's his father?" The lady kept silence with apparent displeasure on her face. "He got a little on the side," answered the woman who said to have a former Marine husband. "A little on the side?" When the Damel Promotion Association accepted him as one of their members, those dirty bastards got him a new girl. He left his family after getting caught cheating on her. It was something he had experienced once before. Jael got up from his seat before they could continue with more of their stories. "I'll think about your offer. I need some time to think it through before I can accept." Since he had been using the stick, now it was time to give them a carrot. "But before I leave, there's something I'd like to give you. Here, take this." "Huh? But this is." What the boy was handing to them was a stash of ration stamps. Some extras that Lieutenant Capstone had been giving him before the mission, and his share of stamps he received after completing the mission. There were more than 50 stamps in total. The refugees mobbed around the boy and received the stamps, almost snatching them out of his hand. They all looked like they couldn't understand what was happening. Some of them even cried. To them, his action of giving away his stamps meant more than him just offering them a day worth of food. "I'll finish my dinner as soon as possible and go to the ration center. Since I dealt with them on our way here, they won't dare to take your tickets while I'm there with you." The ration center was the place where the refugees usually got their ration stamps robbed, since going there meant that you had stamps. This kind of care, showing the people his ability as a leader, was an effective way to strengthen the group mentality of members of a community at the earlier stages of its establishment. Jael left the tent with a rousing, yet calculative send-off. Name of an ideology? That started when Korea was still the Goguryeo dynasty. It means to take back what's been lost. In modern days, Damel now means to bring back the past glory. These people legit believe that Korea used to rule most of the land that's now occupied by China. So to take back what's been lost equals to take back the land from the Chinese. Chapter 10. Factions. 3. Camp Roberts. Talent Advantage is a system that helps players reacquire skills they have already learned in previous playthroughs. If n equals times the player has learned the skill in previous playthroughs, then the experience points required for learning the skill in future playthroughs becomes 1/n. But this often raises the question of whether there is any benefit when n only equals 1. The answer to this is yes, there is a benefit. And that is that the ignorance penalty will no longer be applied when learning the skill. This mechanic is exactly what the game developers intended. They wanted players, on their first few tries, to feel helpless in the face of an overwhelming calamity, and then, for them to enjoy conquering those hardships with exceptional ability. Since players have the possibility of enjoying the same content from completely different perspectives, this is an excellent game mechanic in terms of controlling players' content consumption speed. Jael had also experienced quite a lot of bad endings. Although the skills he acquired in each playthrough were never the same, there were certain skills he would always learn without exception. Those included most combat-related skills, a few survival skills, certain languages and some of the core leadership-type skills such as insight detection and deception. Skills can be classified into 4 great divisions according to one's mastery over them. From level 1 to level 3, skills are classified as beginner, from 4 to 6 as expert, from 7 to 10 as master, and those that go beyond level 10 are called superhuman. The experience points required for increasing the level of a skill increase exponentially as the level goes up. The boy had not yet spent the experience points gained from the San Miguel mission. When considering his current progress in the game, his skill levels were already very high. The majority of his combat skills had already reached the superhuman level thanks to the talent advantage system. Therefore, Jael was ready to engage in combat even under disadvantageous conditions. Otherwise, it would have been a problem. Leveling up combat skills has an effect of increasing a hidden stat, menace. The effect activates when the player recognizes someone as an enemy. As for Jael, he was now at the level of a ferocious beast. Because of this, the volunteers in charge of distributing rations kept staring at Jael as he stood at the ration center as promised. Refugees from different factions were working at the distribution counters, and the ones that didn't belong to their factions were being treated unfairly. Jael spotted some of the people from the tent queuing up. When they met his eyes, they greeted him with a nod. Although they didn't say anything, gratitude could be seen in their eyes. As the boy stood watch, he noticed one of the volunteers behind a counter serving a copious amount of food on a man's plate. "Excuse me." "Yes? I think your job is to distribute the rations evenly. Do you think this looks even?" Jael said as he pointed at the plate the man was holding. "Oh, I'm from the Demo Promotion Association," she answered with her face pale. "So what?" "So." The woman looked at the man with dismay. The man put on a bold face in an effort to look strong. Many of the refugees in the same line also glared at the boy with anger while the rest of the refugees were bewildered, watching the sudden development. But not long after, a middle-aged man came approaching with a smile on his face. Contrary to his kind-looking face, he had a muscular body. By all appearances, his physique should have been something impossible to maintain with the amount of rations that refugees normally received. Considering he was loitering around the ration center, he seemed to be a commissioner of one of the factions. "Well, you're as gutsy as I've heard. Hey kid, will you come here for a second? There's someone I need you to meet." "No, I can't." The man's face grew grim. He threw a look around and pulled at the boy's shoulder with a gentle-looking smile. "If you just stand here and block these people, it won't do any good to anybody here. It so happens that our boss wants to have a word with you. So why don't you just come here for a second?" The man tried to pull him away by force, but the boy didn't budge an inch. To the befuddled man, Jael said flatly, "I'll give you the time after the rationing is done. By the way, if you happen to know these people, could you tell them to do their jobs properly? If they don't, well, I'm gonna have to do something about it." Jael didn't say exactly what he would do. It was better to leave the job to their imagination. The man looked at the boy with a blank expression and then sighed out loud before patting him on his shoulder. "All right. But promise me you'll come with me afterward, will ya?" "Okay." The middle-aged man then talked to some of the refugees waiting in line. They started pouring out loads of complaints, but when the man gave them a stern frown, they all became quiet. The other man who had previously received a pile of rations came back and returned his rations to the counter. The man stared daggers at the boy, but when the boy looked back at him, he winced and hurriedly moved out of the line with his head lowered. Those who got their rations with the help of the boy gobbled up their ration on the spot. The reason why they didn't go find indoor seats to eat their meal was because they were afraid of having their food taken away on their way inside. Refugees from different factions looked at them with displeasure, but they couldn't cause any trouble because of the soldiers on watch. Just when the refugees finished their meal, the middle-aged man came up to the boy. "It's time to keep your promise. Our boss is waiting for you. Lead the way." "Gosh, aren't you prickly?" Though the man was trying to sound calm, his voice was quivering slightly. On their way, he kept stealing glances at the boy, from which the boy noticed both pent-up anger and fear within his eyes. He was being affected by the boy's menace. The middle-aged man stopped in front of a tent. It looked almost too ordinary to be their boss' quarters. Considering that the supplies the refugees had access to were military products, it wasn't much of a surprise. But once they stepped inside, it was like a whole nother world. as if they had stitched several tents together. The inside of the tent was wider than it looked from the outside. And just from what he could see from the entrance, 5 fireplaces were keeping the tent warm, and several light bulbs brightly illuminated every corner of the tent. However, despite the size of the tent, it seemed like only a few people were residing in it. There were about 20 camp beds sparsely placed inside the tent, and the rest of the space was filled with pieces of furniture such as desks and chairs. There were even a couch and a TV on one side. Jael couldn't understand the reason behind having a TV here, since the only thing being broadcast should be disaster news, over and over again. In the middle of the tent was a large rectangular table, and there was already a group of well-muscled men sitting around the table with an old man at its end. The table was also loaded with glasses, bottles of alcohol, and a few plates full of accompaniment for drinks. Jael saw an empty seat at the other end of the table. Their intentions were obvious, but the boy decided to play along. "Oh, here comes the man of the camp. Everyone, give him a big round of applause." Not this again, the boy thought. The men and women sitting at both sides of the table clapped their hands with stiff expressions. It seemed like they were trying to look disciplined, but it only added to their awkwardness. Apparently, this faction was running under this kind of military discipline. Suddenly, a girl in a provocative dress grabbed him by his arm and pulled him to the empty seat. "Here, have a seat." The girl touched the boy's body more than necessary, but the boy remained unperturbed. He was too well experienced with the game to be swayed by such a primitive desire. Jael silently sat down on his seat and looked straight ahead. "You're bold. I like that." The old man nodded with a broad grin. "I should introduce myself first. I am Limhwasu. I am the head of the Damal Promotion Association. Our people call me Maklijai. What is your name?" "I'm Han Jael." "Jael, eh? That's a good name. It fits you perfectly. In your eyes, I can see the cold winter wind blowing like a blizzard. Isn't that right, my boys?" "Yes, Maklijai." The people exclaimed in unison. Their voices were so loud that he felt like he had gone deaf for a few seconds. It must have been to scare him. But to Jael, it was nothing more than dogs barking. Noticing the boy was still unruffled, Wasu nodded as the edge of his lips curled up. "A silent kind, I see. A man needs to know how to control himself. Do you know President Park? He managed to make our country so rich and so powerful by incorporating our people's talents into his policies. The men in our country used to have so much power and courage. But the generations that came after ours, they grew up like flowers in a greenhouse. They lost the lofty spirits of our ancestors, the great Gogarayo and the great Jushin. However, you're different from those weak and incompetent young men." "Yes. That's right. In the old days, a man could cut off the enemy's head with one stroke at the age of 17. Don't you agree, my boys?" There he goes again, the boy thought. He knew that the old man asking for his subordinates' opinions, was just him showing off his status. It was easy to notice since the boy not only was good at understanding people's minds, but he had also played Days After Apocalypse, where human relationships play an important role, too many times. Once again, the people shouted out loud to express their agreement. Wasidham let out a roar of laughter and beckoned to the girl still standing next to the boy. Age doesn't matter for one to rise in the world. That's even more so in today's world. And a great man must know how to enjoy alcohol and women. Anju, pour our great man a drink." "Yes, Maklijainam." Before the boy could stop her, the girl standing behind him leaned towards him, grabbed a bottle on the table and poured the pumpkin-colored liquor into the glass with ice cubes placed in front of him. Her skin touching the boy's cheek felt so soft and warm. And as expected, the corner of his view was being flooded with notifications of viewers' messages. He didn't bother opening up the message log since he knew that the viewers must be claiming for sex. Considering the refugee camp's current situation, This was all quite extravagant, including the liquor and the ice. Seeing the level of luxury of the Damol Promotion Association, the second largest faction, the boy began to wonder what kind of luxurious life the leader of the Korean Patriotic Association, the largest faction, was leading. While Jae-il was lost in thought as he watched the glass being filled, Wasu raised his glass and exclaimed, "Everybody, raise your glasses. We can't not have a drink before having a man-to-man talk. I'm sorry, but I'll pass on the drink. I'd be grateful if you could cut to the chase." "Huh, is it because this is your first time drinking? That's great. The first experience is always important. This liquor right here, it's called Shiva's Regal." But Wasi couldn't continue his words when he saw Jae-il grabbing his glass, stretching his arm to his side and slowly pouring the liquor onto the floor. Wasu's face stiffened. The mood turned cold all of a sudden. "You motherfucker." Some people pulled out knives. Although they were mostly kitchen knives, they were enough to kill a person. But Jae-il, as if nothing could perturb him, put down the glass back quietly onto the table and stared straight at Wasu. "Get to the point." When the refugees were about to attack the boy, Wasu quelled them down. "Enough. What are you all doing? Did I tell you to interfere with our conversation? Or have you forgotten your place?" I'm sorry, Maklijinem." The commotion subsided at once. Everyone fell silent as if nothing had happened in the first place. Only the tense atmosphere was left hovering in the air. Wasu chowed down on a skewer, and relaxedly emptied a glass of liquor. Then he slapped his knees and said to the boy, "I like how fearless you are, but you ought to know when not to. Fear is a survival instinct that all animals have. So when you are in danger, you have to put aside your false bravado. This is advice from me as an elder in life, so I hope you bear it in mind. Okay. So why did you want to see me?" "Ha ha ha." Wasi cast a glance around the tent before grabbing another skewer. Jae-il watched him swallowing the greasy skewer without budging an eyebrow. He knew that all his actions were just to show him how relaxed he was about the whole situation. After seeing the boy unperturbed, Wasu put on a wry face before finally talking about his business. "The reason why I called you here is nothing special. I just wanted to ask whether you'd like to join our faction. You've got skills, you've got guts, and you've got some connections. I've also heard you are a friend of that stickler, Lieutenant Capstone, aren't you? I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in your offer. Don't jump to a conclusion and hear me out. I swear this is certainly not a bad offer for you either. You see, the Korean Patriotic Association is already the strongest faction here. They already have plenty of people like you. If you join them now, Jae-il, those piranhas won't let you take a big role. They always say that Koreans have to stick together, but when it comes to a turf war, they will try to tear you apart and eat you alive. But we're different. Our faction needs a man like you. And we'll treat you just as great as you are. Say, what do you think of Anju? Do you like her? You can have her if you join us. And if you see any other girl you like, I can give them to you. Having 1 or 2 concubines is the basic aspect of a hero. You can also drink and smoke to your heart's content. A man of your caliber, Jae-il, deserves all this." And when Jae-il turned his gaze to his side, Anju began to cling to him. Blowing warm breath on his neck, she reached out to his hands, placed them on her breasts, and made him knead her breasts. The fruity scent of her skin sweetly tickled his nose. The warmth of her body was conveyed to the tips of his fingers and slowly spread out to the bottom half of his body. The viewers with sensory synchronization activated must be cheering out loud by now. The female viewers, if there is any, must be frowning. Of course, there is also the possibility that they have their senses synchronized with Anju. He heard that many female viewers enjoyed this kind of content without any qualms, as they were in a virtual world. I feel a bit sorry I'll have to disappoint them. Although Jae-il thought so, part of him did not feel sorry at all. The boy pushed the girl away, slowly but surely. Anju urgently tried to stick tightly onto him, but he rejected her even more firmly. She then looked at Wasu in terror. "Oh? You don't like her?" Wasu smacked his lips and let out a smirk. "Well, how about this one?" He then ordered his subordinates to bring in a Japanese girl. After the largest Japanese faction, Sumaiya Shikai was struck down to the verge of collapse during the conflict between factions, it was said that the Japanese refugees had fallen into precarious conditions. The boy knew this too. However, he who had only seen the report written in the game's journal didn't realize how bad their situation really was. But now, the boy realized what it meant when he saw the girl being dragged into the tent. "Lay her down." With the old man's order, a group of 3 women came forward and suppressed the girl's limbs. "Stop whining, you pussy." The only thing she was wearing was a piece of cloth that was cut to look like a kimono. But even that soon slid down because of her struggling, leaving her half naked. Her voice that was crying for help in Japanese was already raspy. The bodies of the girl who was trying to resist and the woman who were weighing her down got tangled up and created a rather obscene scenery. In the end, the other woman grabbed her legs and spread them out towards the boy. Watching the whole incident with a pleased expression, Wasu turned to the boy. "I know what boys of your age look for is. How should I call it? Right, violence. A lust for conquest. Look. Can't you feel something wriggling inside you? What if I told you I'm not interested? I'd call it a lie." The shadow of the old man drawn over the struggling girl looked like a statue of a demon. Then those who surrender themselves would be devil worshippers. The reason why Jai-Il chose Days After Apocalypse over other games was because of how realistically things were described in this game. To Jai-Il, whose whole life was like living in winter, the real world was nothing but a paradise for the wicked. But contrary to his experience, the worlds described in most games had bright atmospheres, unlike the world he knew. No matter how hard the boy tried to enjoy those games, he couldn't erase the thought of this world as not real out of his head. Like a drop of oil could not mix inside a pool of water, he couldn't help feeling isolated from the rest of the world. But Jai-Il didn't feel that in Days After Apocalypse. And thanks to that, he could immerse himself in this world and forget about the horrible reality. "This is where I belong." After a deep breath, Jai-Il spat out a sentence. "Sir, go fuck yourself." It was as if a bomb had dropped inside the tent. Hi. This is Novel Admire. Thanks for the visit. Come back again for more novels.